An anthropological approach to Sarkicism. Our understanding of Sarkicism has changed dramatically over the last few decades. This information has revealed a diverse and shifting paradigm far different from the monolithic creed first hypothesized. We are now able to paint a broader, more detailed picture of the Sarkic religion, its various sects, and cultural traditions. Modern sects are the product of divergent interpretations, many bearing a mere superficial resemblance to their ancient progenitor cult. Most unexpected, especially among early scholars of Sarkicism such as myself, are the seemingly benevolent intentions of its founders. The road to hell, it is often said, is paved with good intentions, an aphorism the Foundation must always keep close in mind, for despite the eons between us, we gaze into that very same abyss, and like the ancient Sarkites, we have found it full of monsters. Dr. Desmarais, at great risk to himself, seeks to better understand Sarkicism and its ever-shifting paradigm through the study of living communities, revealing what ruins, artifacts, and the dead cannot. Though his methods are unorthodox, at least for the Foundation, his results are undeniable and deserving of continued support. Dr. Judith Lowe, Senior Advisor at the Department of History, Religious GUI Threat Analysis. Case Study 1. The Vaśņa of Sarvi. Dr. Matthew Desmarais, Department of Anthropology. A number of indigenous Finno-Ugric people inhabit the Arctic area of Sápmi, which today encompasses parts of far northern Norway, Sweden, Finland, and the Kola Peninsula of Russia. Due to a distant but shared cultural origin, Sarkic communities are difficult to differentiate from local Sami, but these similarities quickly disappear with closer inspection. These people identify themselves as the Vaśņa, and they are the subject of this study. One Vaśņa community is the village of Sarvi, located on the coast of Lake Inari in the Lapland region of Finland. The people of Sarvi are isolated but self-sufficient. They harvest fish via primitive but clever traps, and herd a distinct subspecies of reindeer for meat, fur, and transportation. Sarvi remains connected to other Vaśņa communities throughout the Arctic, including some which are entirely nomadic, but who join together for significant religious events or in the defense of their ancestral homeland. The Vaśņa belong to haplogroup NM23-1, a Y chromosome DNA haplogroup typical of northern Eurasia, and have likely lived along Lake Inari for the last 4,000 to 6,000 years. It is believed that the Vaśņa descend from or share a common ancestry with the so-called reindeer folk of Adiyitum, a Finno-Ugric people once native to the northern Urals, who were among the first followers of Grand Karcist Ion. The Norse saga The Tale of Asbjorn the Unready relates a failed invasion of Lapland, whose inhabitants closely resemble Finno-Ugric Sarkites. The natives are described as having ghostly pale bodies, though this is likely a reference to white body paint, covered in red-colored runes. There are frequent, often gratuitous references to blood and flesh, as well as blood magic, a land kraken, a god of entrails, and several stanzas dedicated to the description of a Norse warlord being turned inside out. For a time, the inhabitants of Sápmi, whether Sarkic or non-anomalous Sami, lived in relative peace. Sweden and Norway would seize control of the area by the 15th century. But the Vaśņa tribes, due to their northern isolation, remained largely unaffected. During World War II, German forces in northern Finland applied scorched earth tactics to the region, causing devastating losses among both the Vaśņa and Sami. Between 1946 and 1961, the village of Sarvi was under the occupation of GRO Division P, and village elders speak of brutal experimentation and later unmerciful vengeance. Although the elders do not explain what occurred in detail, they were certain to note that it did prevent GRO Division P from ever returning. Culture, tradition, and misconceptions. The Vaśņa refer to their religious beliefs as Nel'lka. The word Sarkic is actually a pejorative created by the Mechanites, an ancient anomalous cult of Mediterranean origin, as well as the probable forebears of the Church of the Broken God. Efforts to remove this Eurocentric misnomer from the Foundation lexicon have proven fruitless. Sarkites worship neither flesh nor a god of flesh. In fact, while there is a belief in the existence of gods, they are reviled rather than revered. An example of dystheism, the belief that a god, goddess, or singular god is not wholly good as presented and even possibly evil. The Grand Karcist and his claviger play an important role in daily living. Volutaar Lovraka to the Vaśņa is invoked by soon-to-be mothers and those seeking love. Orok offers strength and protection, and amulets depicting his icon are worn by hunters for good luck. Nadok's pronounced na-dok by the Vaśņa is prayed to by those seeking wisdom or those merely wishing to make the right choice. Sarn is less commonly called upon, but when she is, it is usually in the hopes of cursing and vowing vengeance upon an enemy. And the Grand Karcist Ion, pronounced Yan by the Vaśņa, is prayed to daily, although the Vaśņa request little from him, claiming that his work is too important to be selfishly interrupted. Reports of human sacrifice appear to be unfounded. The community practices endocannibalism as a funerary rite, but scoffs at the implication of hunting humans, though they do state that it would be wasteful to simply allow any corpse to decay. Life in Sarvi is relatively simple, even idyllic, if one enjoys the cold. An outsider might not notice anything unusual at first, and I would go so far as to argue that these people could assimilate into other communities without significant issue, were they to choose to do so. Peace is valued and rarely broken beyond the occasional petty squabble. Neither puritanical nor libertine, the Vaśņa have a generally healthy attitude towards love and sexuality. One today might refer to these views as progressive, but such a label is relative and distracts from the ancient roots of their norms and folkways. Sexual orientation is regarded as a spectrum, though they do not refer to it as such, and concepts like heterosexuality and homosexuality are viewed as strange and restricting. The Vaśņa do not allocate labor based on gender, despite living a traditional way of life that tends to lend itself to such a practice, and this has possibly resulted in a diminished concept of gender. But gender and even biological sex appear to be quite fluid throughout all Sarkic traditions. The denizens of Sarvi treat the human body as a canvas, artistically expressing themselves through tattoos, scarification, bone piercings, and the occasional corporeal augmentation. Traditional garb is practical and rustic, but includes a pleasing aesthetic. Such outfits are usually composed of wool, leather, and fur. Locals use natural dyes, which include red, bluish-black, and yellow, and clothes are decorated with symbols and patterns associated with the Sarkic religion. Though physically isolated, the people of Sarvi are not entirely disconnected from the outside world. Radios have long been common, and the younger generation occasionally gains access to technology with Internet access. The incremental nature of these changes is not the result of some aversion to technology, but rather due to an extreme distaste for money, with most residents preferring to barter with outsiders. Sarvi, in turn, functions as a sort of proto-communism, the concept of private property being entirely foreign as well. Those born within Sarvi are free to leave, and it is possible that their traditions are being secretly practiced in more populated areas without anyone taking notice. From what I am able to gather, most return, but those that stay with the outside world are not begrudged for their choice, though I have certainly sensed disappointment. Take that as you will. Locals refer to this practice as one's Volutaar or the wandering. Dávgon, a young man in his mid-20s, attended university in Helsinki before returning. He received a degree in microbiology and financially supported himself through odd jobs. I would interview Dávgon about his culture and faith. The transcript is available in the collapsible below. Interview subject: Dávgon the Younger, June 15th. Interviewed: Dávgon the Younger. Interviewer: Dr. Matthew Desmarais. Dávgon is less apprehensive towards the Foundation than other residents. Earning his trust and confidence is instrumental to my work in Sarvi. Intelligent and inquisitive, he enjoys relating his interpretations of Sarkic scripture and how they pertain to modern science. Hello, Dávgon. I would like to ask you a few questions. Dr. Desmarais said, Go ahead. Dávgon replied, How does your community view the practice of Lihakutak? Dr. Desmarais asked, To shepherd the flesh is no trivial act. Yes, some are born with a natural affinity for the craft, but it requires meditation, years of training. Nor should it be abused for the sake of power and glamour. Dávgon explained, Do you have any idea how it works? Dr. Desmarais inquired, It isn't magic. The actual mechanics are beyond me, but try to imagine yourself perceiving all living things at a genetic level. Imagine shifting through cells, moving them around, switching genes on or off as if they were a light switch. Dávgon said, laughing nervously, I'm sorry, but I'm not very good at this. I might as well try to explain color to the blind. If performed correctly, it is a transformative experience, exploiting a flaw in nature, pulling it like a thread of cloth, and watching the whole thing uncoil before your eyes. The hard part is using that thread to create something new. He added, So you have experience with the craft? Dr. Desmarais asked, Yes, some. I'll have to show you the burrows later. I doubt the elders would mind. Dávgon replied, I would very much like that. Dr. Desmarais said, Good, good. Dávgon responded, smiling, Do you not change yourselves? We have encountered other practitioners of your faith who, Dr. Desmarais began. We are nothing like the gluttonous. Dávgon interrupted, Explain. Dr. Desmarais asked, The ones your foundation call neo-Sarkite. Those that betrayed everything we stood for, they are no different from Volutaars. They have no interest in ending the tyranny of the gods. They simply wish to replace them. Dávgon explained, Isn't apotheosis a central goal of Nel'lka? Dr. Desmarais asked, Not like this. The grand Karcist sought to raise all people. We hunger from famine of the flesh and spirit. They are the devourers that feast while the masses starve. Murderers and rapists, every one. They spit on Ion and his ways. Why compare them to us? Dávgon said angrily, I'm sorry, but I overheard some of your associates the other day. I'm fully capable of understanding English, you know. Your organization lumps us together, labels us all Sarkic. Nel'lka is a religion, my religion, something I take pride in. But these monsters are pretenders. They appropriate our faith, wear it like strutting fashionistas, but they are not us. He added, "Have you encountered these people?" Dr. Desmarais asked. Dávgon visibly paled and refused to make eye contact. "Yes, during my Volutaar, but I do not wish to speak of it." He replied, "Might we visit the burrows instead? I know you are curious about our Lihakutak traditions." Dávgon is a man of two worlds, attempting to bridge the gap between myth and science, the past and present. But I sense struggle, the two facets of his identity not as harmonious as he believes. Many seek religion when in search of answers not meant for science, whereas he sought the sciences, hoping to answer the questions presented by his faith. Located beneath the village is an ancient network of cavernous tunnels. Dated to the 2nd millennium BCE, it is potentially the oldest Sarkic structure west of the Ural Mountains, and was likely settled by the Adi people prior to or shortly after the successful overthrow of Divite rule. The walls display thousands of years of artistic expression, either painted with red pigment or engraved into the stone itself. Images include flora and fauna, some of which are entirely unidentifiable, and humanoid figures undergoing metamorphosis. Aditite glyphs are also common, but most are faded beyond recognition, their meaning a casualty of time. These caverns are also used in the cultivation of various fungi. Foundation mycologists identifying 13 unique and previously unrecorded species. One species, the recently named Mycena candentes, or Ion's flame to the locals, produces a green light quite reminiscent of the auroras common to the region, with a brighter bioluminescence than any known non-anomalous organism. The fungus is harvested and used to light the village at night. Another fungus, Psilocybe Calixtinus, or Nadok's eyes to the locals, is a potent psychotropic employed during religious rituals. Another section serves as a kennel, housing a previously unknown SCP species, classified as SCP type Theta. The creatures wag their tails and tendrils and pant excitedly at our arrival. Although their behavior differs little from the average canine, they look absolutely nothing alike. Indeed, it would be difficult to even recognize them as mammals, something Foundation biologists continue to debate. Known as panalka or witch hounds, the species has a leathery red epidermis, chitinous white plates and scales, a thick mane of white feathers, and a row of prehensile tendrils along its spine. Its head resembles a featureless skull, while its mouth opens along multiple axes, due to the multiple flaps of muscle and skin that compose the aperture. Its 6 legs provide excellent locomotion, and its feet resemble a cross between talons and hooves. Although they lack visible eyes, Dávgon assures me that their vision is keen and that they even see things beyond the sight of man. I asked about SCP type Theta's origins, Dávgon informing me that the seemingly chimeric species does in fact descend from wolves. I delved deeper, perhaps deeper than one in my position should, into the ethical ramifications of flesh grafting. Dávgon took a moment to laugh and shake his head, then replied, "They are healthier than wolves. They can live well over 80 winters, and they are as clever as ravens. You outsiders are in no place to criticize our ways. Your methods are both inefficient and cruel. Can you truly say the same of your dogs? The pug is a crime against nature. I found no fault in his argument. Shifting the conversation, I inquired again about his faith and was able to convince him to translate some Sarkic scripture. Though the Foundation has encountered Sarkic scripture in the past, such documents vary from cult to cult and are devoid of codification. In turn, such documents are rife with contradictions, and there is strong evidence that much of the Sarkic religion, its history, mythology, ritual, and dogma, was either lost or purposefully removed. The Volutaar, the most complete Sarkic grimoire in Foundation possession, displays evidence of gross alterations dating back centuries. This suggests that shortly after the original faith, or Sarkicism, as Dr. Lowe has proposed, suffered its greatest defeat, others sought to control the narrative and use it towards their own ends. Such is the way of even non-anomalous religions. What Dávgon was able to translate proved intriguing and important to understanding the Sarkic ethos, while also providing a possible explanation for the peacefulness of Sarvi. Examples are provided in the collapsible below. Newly recovered scripture. Ion's sermon at the Black Sea. If you seek treasure, power, and reputation, to rule man through conquest and tyranny, then leave us now, return to the shadows of your own black ambition, and know that you will not escape our light. But should you wish to learn wisdom, to shatter the chains of bondage and realize the potential of mankind, then I shall embrace you as blood and teach you the way of all flesh. You take pride in your triumphs. This is not unexpected, for you have shown the world that the Diva can be felled, that they can be driven from your lands. No longer will your children be fed to their infernal engines. No longer will you sacrifice to their gods of pain and domination. We are the doomed that stand defiant for the redemption of the many. Be ever mindful, for pride precipitates a terrible fall. As you gaze deep into the void, let not the void become you. Our great work is incomplete, for as long as the gods remain, we will never be free. Take pity on the Diva, for they are but shadows upon the wall, harbingers of those that cast its darkness, a darkness we must dispel. But as long as humanity remains divided, as long as they believe the lies of the gods, we cannot know victory. We will sail the vast seas, we will march through the highest mountains. We will spread our ways until the whole of the world knows our truth, and the light of truth shines through endless night. Võlutaar falls only to be reborn, and Võlutaar said unto Ion, "This rebellion ends now. You will be denied the martyrdom you seek. You were born a slave, and so a slave you shall remain. By the gods, I will claim you as my own. I will know you. I will break you. You will forsake your vows 1,000 times and crawl through flame just to worship at my holiest of altars. You will salivate and rise at the sound of my voice. My pleasure will become your new religion, and when the day comes, you will feel honored to die by my hand." The Grand Karcist set aside his staff, let his robes fall, and stood calm with open arms. "Pathetic," said the Diva, but the Grand Karcist intended no such surrender, for, lo, his flesh took new shape. Blessed tendrils erupted from his ascended form and bound Võlutaar as a spider did its prey. And Ion said unto Võlutaar, "See through the lies of your god-queen and her demonic masters. Surrender and be witness to the dread reality of our world and beyond. Feel the pain of the many, their suffering and sorrow, and know that we are all one flesh." The ancient litany flooded the Diva's mind and pulled her into its abyss. She beheld her mother, Diva of Divas, god queen of an empire, and saw the crimson tethers that dictated her every action. Her power comes at a price. Spoke the voice of Ion, her will is not her own. She is bound by the blood, shaped by the blood, and so too are you. May your delusion of power fade, for you have never been free. You have always been a slave. Your traditions, your supposed birthright, are entirely meaningless. Who really lurks behind your mask of violence and domination? What is left when only truth remains? Võlutaar fell ever deeper, and from the darkness came temples, great and terrible ziggurats dedicated to the gods. From their terraces flowed rivers of blood, and the voice of Ion spoke again. Symbols have power. You are Diva. You know this well. That is what the living avatars taught your people. But these pacts come with a terrible price. A price that drives your empire. A price you force upon others to escape your fate. Sacrifice after sacrifice after sacrifice. Why do the gods thirst for blood? Why do they covet your faith? Look closer. See the cracks in their divinity. Behold the workings of their twisted machinations. And the temples crumbled, stone by stone, revealing undulating flesh in impossible shapes. She beheld them across every iteration of reality, eternity, and doom, creation and destruction, all in the same form. Her mind screamed, suffocating at the edge of madness. These were the true gods, the faceless rulers of the universe. But there was more, something beyond even the gods and their black, unspeakable ambitions. The threads of fate all pull in one direction, moved just as the stars and moon and sea. And Võlutaar gazed upon the truth of our reality. Here was the tumorous heart of our stillborn universe, the beginning and the end of all things, mother and father, our dread progenitor, a cosmic void wrapped in flesh and sinew, eternally screaming its inconceivable secrets from a billion venom-soaked tongues. Its world-devouring maw opened, and she beheld the countless souls who bellow in grief and tears. And Ion said with sorrow, "Not even in death do you feel their pain. Without suffering, there can be no empathy. Without empathy there is hope. And without hope we will never transcend." Võlutaar felt their suffering. Never before had she known such pain. And in sorrow and in love we become one. We are the new flesh that will usurp the old, and end this cosmic blasphemy once and for all. I hold truth as a flame, may it burn away your falsehoods. Võlutaar was returned to reality. She fell to the ground, shedding tears for the living, for the dead, and for all she had ever harmed. "Just kill me," said the diva. "I am at your mercy. End this now. You have your chance." Ion placed his hand upon her cheek, and Ion said unto Võlutaar, "Take off your mask." Ion stands before the people of Urartu. The people of Urartu wished to welcome the grand Karcist, who by right of war was now master of the city and of the lives and fortunes of its people. Ion took to the palace balcony and cast his gaze upon the multitudes. Finding the people soaked in blood and viscera, the grand Karcist demanded to know just what they had done. "We give you the blood of our children, a great sacrifice in your name, for you, our Savior, our living God." They swayed in rapturous delight, raising their crimson hands so that Ion might behold the evidence of their deed. "For your power and glory," they cried. The grand Karcist stumbled back and fell to his knees. The broken remains of the innocent littered the ground, while their mothers and fathers stood entranced, their eyes wide with fanaticism. Auroch joined Ion's side, helped him to his feet, and asked, "Do these animals deserve salvation? Can they even be redeemed? Ion hesitated, blinded by the glare of this atrocity. Yes. He answered even as tears rolled down his cheeks. They are ignorant, knowing only the way of the Diva and their perverse gods. We will teach them and lead them away from this darkness. Auroch sighed and lowered his head. At the first sign of weakness, they will turn on you like the ravenous beasts that they are. I would advise retiring for the night. The mob is simply too unpredictable. Best we allow their fervor to die, and if they seek to bring you harm, I will crush them. They can be saved. He again reminded, they must be. The Sarkic Calendar emphasizes astronomical phenomena and is based on the alignment of celestial bodies rather than solar, such as the Gregorian calendar, or lunar and lunisolar, such as the traditional Chinese calendar. Precision is unimportant, the calendar recognizing seasons and years but not days. The calendar is primarily used in the reckoning of animal migration and holy periods. The calendar is divided into 3 seasons: Ketkia the cradle, corresponding with spring and early summer; Chilicija the hearth, corresponding with mid to late summer and early autumn; and Kalma the grave, corresponding with mid to late autumn and winter. Sacred periods, known as Vavusajat, times of strength, singular Vavuseka, are similar to the concept of holidays. I was able to observe one such Vavuseka known as Vaśņa. Celebrated in early Ketkia, Vaśņa honors Volutaar and is associated with sex and fertility. It begins with the encouragement of flirtation among uncoupled individuals for 12 days. During this time, those not already ritually bound to a partner or partners are forbidden from having sex. Gifts are given, friendly pranks are played, and amorous feelings are made known. Though the Vaśņa generally lack gender roles, it still appears that female participants are more assertive and aggressive than the males. Similarly, there seems to be an expectation for males to be coy and show more restraint. It is possible that the personalities of the Grand Karcist Ion and his lover, the Claviger Volutaar, influence the development of these dynamics. This is not universal and is only noticeable in female-male interactions. It is important to remember that Sarkites have a notion of human sexuality untouched by Abrahamic religion, manifesting as a spectrum and devoid of terms to distinguish one as heterosexual or homosexual. On the 12th day, uncoupled individuals gather at nightfall and divide themselves into predators and prey. Individuals playing the role of prey don antlered headdresses and long gossamer scarves, but are otherwise nude. Those choosing to act as predators paint themselves with animal blood and wear the skulls and skins of bears and wolves. There appears to be some unspoken understanding of who will play what role as well as who would be hunting who. The prey consume a tea brewed with Psilocybe Calixtinus and are allowed to enter the nearby forest a day before the predators, who themselves are tasked with the raising of lavu, which they then paint with the seal of Volutaar. The predators awaken at dawn and consume the same psychotropic tea and venture into the forest. They return throughout the next few days, with predators carrying their prey over their shoulders. These couples vary in composition and include nearly as many same-sex pairings as opposite. A few aren't even pairs, with 2 predators sharing one prey and another carrying one male and one female slung over both her shoulders. A rather remarkable feat of strength. Prey and predator then enter their lavu, which the other townsfolk elders, those already in relationships, etc., have filled with food and drink during their absence. When their supplies run out, they will return to the village with newly forged relationships. Despite the predatory theme of the celebration, elders inform me that this practice is entirely consensual. I will note that I didn't see a single frown among those that returned. All appeared to be quite happy before I allowed them their privacy. Dávgon offered to arrange an interview with Volutaar Jaská, the eldest resident of Sarvi and the closest person the community has to a leader. I agreed and was brought before her at dusk. Interview subject: Volutaar Jaská, July 19th. Interviewed: Volutaar Jaská. Interviewer: Dr. Matthew Desmarais. Volutaar Jaská is a respected village elder. A centenarian, she studied Sarkicism under the direct tutelage of a Karcist in her youth. Dr. Desmarais looked across the room, fixing his gaze on the subject. Lushekov, Volutaar Jaská. Dávgon the younger suggested I meet with you. He said. Volutaar Jaská, a weathered figure, glared back at him. Ask your questions, outsider. She replied, straight to the point. Fair enough. I would first like to learn a bit more about you, Dr. Desmarais said. Volutaar Jaská's eyes narrowed slightly. I suspect you haven't come all this way to listen to the dull droning of an old woman. She chuckled dryly. But I will play your game. I was born to this village nearly 136 years ago on the eve of Auroch's hunt. Dr. Desmarais raised an eyebrow. An auspicious birth, no doubt. Without warning, Volutaar Jaská struck Dr. Desmarais in the knee with her gnarled cane. Do they not teach you manners where you are from? She snapped. You may speak when I have had my say. She flashed a fleeting grin. My apologies, Volutaar Jaská. I will remain silent until you are finished. Dr. Desmarais replied, trying to suppress his surprise. HMPH, make sure that you do. Volutaar Jaská muttered, as I was saying. Life was simple. I didn't grow up with the fancy machines the youth covet so dearly. Got nothing against technology, but the outside is alluring. The blood of Sarvi will run dry. I say smash those devices lest we lose the village. Her voice grew increasingly unclear and off-subject, as if lost in a moment of nostalgia. Then, suddenly, she refocused. Oh, but my life was good. Good and simple. I was happy. Dr. Desmarais cleared his throat. I was told that you studied under an actual Karcist. Volutaar Jaská nodded slowly. Yes, Karcist Varus. He disappeared when saving us from the Russians. He was clever as a raven and very difficult to kill. I've little doubt that he still lives. I do not miss his love of dramatic surprises. Interesting, Dr. Desmarais said, jotting down a note. I wish to better understand how your people see the universe and its creation. The Grand Karcist refers to it as a failed and fallen creation. But what is the root of this cosmic flaw? Volutaar Jaská raised an eyebrow. Malmancacius, yes. I apologize. Dr. Desmarais replied, uneasy. Volutaar Jaská shrugged dismissively. It is what it is. A brute fact. We do not deny the gods. Ion himself gazed upon their flesh. And yet, what evidence is there for divine benevolence? There is but one acceptable conclusion. Do you know what the oldest falsehood in the universe is? What? Dr. Desmarais asked, leaning forward in his seat. Volutaar Jaská's lips curled slightly, the belief that the gods are good. Accepting this is the first step to understanding our ways. I see, Dr. Desmarais murmured, taking in the words. Volutaar Jaská let out a dry chuckle. You do not come to their defense. Yet neither do you fall to your knees. grasp the hem of my robes, and beg for enlightenment. You don't believe in the gods, do you? Dr. Desmarais paused, searching for his words. I do not. Volutaar Jaská's expression softened. You are a fool, but as you do not serve the outer horrors, perhaps you are at least a good man. Are you a good man, Desmarais? Dr. Desmarais hesitated. I don't really know. A wise answer, if anything. Volutaar Jaská said, I cannot blame you for your lack of belief. You desire evidence of the gods. Evidence would be required. Yes, Dr. Desmarais agreed, pushing forward. Now, that brings me to another question. If the universe is flawed, if all life descends from malevolent gods, how can there be any good? Volutaar Jaská's eyes darkened. The blood of monsters flows through our veins. This is not contested. A pup playing with its kin, a child's laughter, the embrace of an old friend. There is beauty and goodness to be found in this world, but it is the product of defiance. Defiance. Dr. Desmarais asked, his curiosity piqued. Murder and rape, war and madness, that is the true nature of life. Volutaar Jaská replied flatly, Our race is far too often a reflection of our Creator. Wherever there is beauty, wherever there is love and compassion, there is defiance. As you see in nature, defiance is not uncommon. Tell me more of our supposed Creator. Dr. Desmarais asked, his tone urging for deeper understanding. Volutaar Jaská's eyes gleamed with a knowing glint. Despite the greatness of your science, do you still not understand? I would like to hear it from your perspective. Dr. Desmarais said earnestly. Volutaar Jaská paused, contemplating. I know of your science. I know that you have discovered the link between all life. Our common ancestry, Dr. Desmarais asked, intrigued. Yes. Volutaar Jaská confirmed. You believe that we descend from small mindless beasts, invisible to the naked eye, and you would be correct. Change and adaptation, that is the way of all life. But you perceive only a fraction of the truth. You know nothing of its origin. And what is the origin of life? Dr. Desmarais asked, eager for more insight. Volutaar Jaská's expression grew solemn. Human words cannot express this truth. But we can show you, if you are willing. I agreed to her offer. The ritual would involve a tea brewed from Psilocybe Calixtinus. Ill-prepared for what I would encounter, I write this after several days of hospitalization. Further experiments with Psilocybe Calixtinus should be conducted with D-class personnel. I do not begrudge the people of Sarvi for what occurred. They have likely developed a tolerance to the substance and had no frame of reference to predict an outsider's reaction. Psilocybe Calixtinus Test 1, Dr. Matthew Desmarais. This part is censored. Jaská was right. The words do not come easily. Ineffable concepts and visceral sensations, and history, too much history. The stains of time are that of memories and rust. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be cryptic. I keep reminding myself that it was just a hallucination, no different from a dream, and that there is no reason for me to believe in any of this. But it seemed so real, even as I felt myself unravel at the helix. For a moment I experienced oneness with the universe. There was no sense of harmony, no spiritual bliss. There was only the clarity of pain. I had become some small variable in a cosmic organism of inconceivable size, some undulating vastness of unintelligent decay. This was the true flesh. I saw a red leviathan rise from a black sea. The longer I watched, the more I began to realize that this monster and its dark waters were one and the same. I remember turning my gaze to the stars, perhaps seeking some solace in their familiarity. The stars resembled drops of freshly shed blood upon an obsidian altar. The stars moved, forming a spiral in the inky blackness of the night sky. I looked down. Where was the Leviathan? Where was the sea, red and black, flesh and void? It was all connected somehow. The spiral twisted and spun with increasing velocity. There was a mournful voice among the madness. It spoke with words I had never heard, but whose laconic meaning was clear. The wheel turns again. Then there was nothing, no light, no sound, only darkness. Thoughts and memories flowed from my mind like mist from open veins. All that remained was a fleeting memory of a memory as I sunk into the thoughtlessness of torpor. Pain forced my eyes open, and I saw a certain priestess. Her skin pale as stone, her eyes as bright as the jewelry and trinkets that decorated her form. Though her beauty inspired awe, her presence invoked fear and self-insignificance. My naked body was painted with symbols of vague familiarity. I was her sacrifice, and the cruel instruments of her faith were already buried deep inside my torso. My efforts to pull away only facilitated my own injuries, and I fell to my knees. The sacrificial priestess met my gaze, her growing sardonic grin revealing shark-like teeth. She placed a bare foot on my shoulder and gave me the slightest push, sending me tumbling down the stone steps of her blackened ziggurat. I caught fleeting glimpses during my agonizing fall. My own blood, the lifeless landscape, and the grim faces of onlookers, until I hit the base of the structure with a sickening crack. This is likely where it would have ended had this been a dream. The vision repeated, the priestess and the temple remained, but my fate differed. This repeated over and over, a temporal loop of suffering and terror. I had become thoroughly mired in this one event, and could not for the life of me tear myself from it. I felt myself stretched beyond recognition, fragmented by countless tortures' other atrocities. But this was merely the beginning of my downward spiral, the experience growing increasingly difficult to comprehend. I remember a mountain of corpses and constantly shifting shades of red. Tendrils sifting through the remains, penetrating wounds and feeding the dead with new and terrible life. And I see the remains merge and take new shape. It transformed into that red Leviathan. The gods do not change. The gods do not exist, not truly, but they wish to. The void screams for a mother that will never come. Life is drawn to the void like flies to decay. The void wraps itself in sinew and bone and blood, a facsimile of life. The void is a god-shaped hole. It knows nothing but hunger. And I saw the red Leviathan for what it really was. Words fail me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm trembling. The tears keep flowing. I still hear the heartbeat of the universe, the primordial rhythm of sacrifice and war. The universe is a machine, not of metal and gears, but of flesh and stars and nothingness. It is an automated butchery. And we are the flesh that feeds the gods. After receiving extensive therapy, I was again able to continue my work. Despite the accusations of my detractors, I have neither lost my mind nor have I gone native. My experience was a hallucination, and it was never presented as anything more than a chemical trick of the mind. End of Case Study 1, The Vaśňa of Sarvi. Case Study 2, The Divoši of Prague. The Divoši, derived from Slavic divok, meaning heathen or savage, are a crypto-Sarkic people inhabiting Central Europe. My research has ultimately led me to Prague, capital of the Czech Republic, and home to a community of urban-dwelling Divoši. Blood libels, expulsions, forced conversions, and massacres. The history of the Divoši is one marked by persecution. Such incidents have rendered them a stoic and grim people, suspicious of outsiders even by Sarkic standards. They have suffered much to maintain their secrets, and earning their trust will be difficult. Asterisk, the Divoši came to this region following the Sarkic diaspora between 1200 to 1000 BCE. Following the fall of the Adytum, the followers of Sarkicism were scattered throughout Eurasia. Isolated and decentralized, this event is believed to be the principal cause for the immense diversity among Sarkic cults and culture groups. The Divoši initially settled in the Rhineland, living in relative peace among Germanic and Slavic tribes until the Christianization of the region by Charlemagne during the late 700s CE. Like their pagan kin, they were the victims of forced conversion and exile. Throughout the Middle Ages, they were accused of heresy and/or witchcraft and burned at the stake. By the early modern period, they endured pogroms alongside Roma and Jews, despite having no discernible relationship to either. By the 1600s, surviving Divoši had resettled in Bohemia and Moravia, finding tolerance among the Czech people. Like others who previously found a safe haven in Prague, they would ultimately suffer vast casualties during the German occupation of Czechoslovakia between 1938 and 1945. Records provided by the Divoši indicate a population of approximately 12,000 throughout Europe at the start of the 20th century. By 1945, they had been reduced to around 600 individuals. It is believed that their people only escaped total eradication when their anomalous nature was recognized by the Honor Obscura Corps, though these survivors were forced to undergo human experimentation. The Foundation first encountered the Divoši as test subjects at Eisenblatt, a top-secret Nazi science facility located near the then recently liberated there, Seenst, at concentration camp. A bargain was struck with their leader, the Karcist Nakiakken, which resulted in the unusual amount of freedom enjoyed by these Sarkites despite being technically under Foundation control. Karcist Nakiakken was able to achieve this by accepting containment without resistance and the promise of its cooperation. Though the details of this agreement are presently classified and only available to authorized project. Citra Atra personnel. Dr. Judith Lowe, a senior member of the project, has informed me that the Foundation initially refused to comply with the offer and attempted to act against the Divoši people. Though she was not authorized to divulge the details of what occurred, it does appear that Karcist Nakiakken had several contingency plans in place to ensure cooperation, leaving the Foundation with no choice but negotiation. The Divoši refer to their religion as the Sin Eaters' Church, though they recognize Nel'lka as the spiritual guidelines of their faith. Efforts to externally disguise their religion and culture have inadvertently resulted in syncretic changes to internal traditions and beliefs, i.e., both esoteric and exoteric traditions and beliefs have developed into an amalgam of Abrahamic, pagan, and Sarkic influences. Examples of this include the presence of saints Svatic, which do not fit under traditional Sarkic hagiography, choosing not to limit their reverence to strictly the Grand Karcist and his claviger. A fresco depicting Saint Antle on the left and Saint Imanta on the right. Such saints include Saint Antle, the thrice returned, patron of resurrection, metamorphosis, and the protection of children. Saint Biela, the devourer of godsmen, patron of soldiers, particularly defenders of the faith, self-sacrifice, and defiance against the gods and their earthly agents. Saint Jongu, the poison moon, patron of medicine, alchemy, and healers. Saint Imanta, the shepherdess of flesh, patron of midwives, surgeons, butchers, and the art of flesh grafting. Saint Milan, the red hook of mercy, patron of righteous assassins, executioners, and other enforcers of justice. Saint Shabalks, the Ashen One, patron of fair law and good governance. Saint Aksaka, the worm of midnight, patron of outcasts, the impoverished, and the diseased. Saint Erathas, the unbroken, patron of craftsmen and the triumph of endurance over drudgery. Divoši practice social seclusion and self-segregation. Most civilians are unaware of the Divoši, and those that are do not appear to know of their aberrant nature. Though the Divoši primarily achieve this via anomalous methods, such minor anomalies ultimately serve the foundation through the preservation of normalcy. Such anomalies are designed to alter how they are perceived by outsiders, causing the Divoši and their homes and temples to appear especially unremarkable and easily forgotten or ignored. This effect is traditionally accomplished through the use of biochemical solutions known as Nemeth and antimemetic cognitohazardous symbols known as Irma, with such symbols being painted on Divoši structures or tattooed upon individuals. The use of Irma is especially noteworthy, as these are able to render received information resistant to memory. For example, if a subject looks at an alleyway, that information is transferred from the eyes to the brain without complication. But if there is a certain Irma painted or engraved within view of the alleyway's entrance, the subject will look, and that information will be perceived but fail to translate to the brain. The human mind does not deal well with such gaps of information, and will instead attempt to fill it in with whatever is most likely based on the rest of the environment. Testing this, the Foundation was able to determine that most will merely perceive a wall, dense vegetation, and in one instance, a police barricade. Uama can be employed to make doors seemingly disappear, render an individual indistinguishable, or to hide the presence of written words, among other uses. The Divoši credit Claviger Naddox with the invention of Irma. Law is of singular importance to the Divoši, and the Sin Eaters Church concerns itself with these matters on a level comparable to Judaism and Islam. A cursory glance would suggest little difference between Sarkic law and the secular and religious laws of public society. Murder is forbidden, so is rape, theft, and assault. But like other cultures and religions, these seemingly straightforward prohibitions are subject to interpretation. Some of the more specific laws include, "Thou shalt consume the flesh raw, touched neither by flame nor luxury. Honor thy prophet, devourer of all sin, and never speak his name in vain. Thou shalt awaken the senses, prying wide thy third eye. Thou shalt not seal thyself from truth through inebriation. Thou shalt eschew decadence in all its forms. Thou shalt enforce the ways of Jaská. Inaction to evil is evil in itself." The Divoši are not a welcoming people, but this is not unexpected given their history and practices. It is only through the Foundation, and its various agreements and threats, that I am able to study these people, and this certainly does not endear them to my mission. Interviews were difficult to procure, but not impossible, having found some success reaching out to the younger generations. Interview subject: Zdeňka Slováčková, April 11th. Interviewed: Zdeňka Slováčková. Interviewer: Dr. Matthew Desmarais. Miss Slováčková, born 1991, is a woman presently employed at a Divoši-owned butcher's shop and delicatessen. I approached her while she enjoyed a smoke break, identifying myself as a member of the Foundation. "Hello, Ms. Slováčková. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" Dr. Desmarais asked. "Ask your questions, outsider." Zdeňka Slováčková replied. "Are you an active member of the Sin Eaters Church?" "Yeah. I lend my voice to the chanters, help teach the sown to the young bloods." Zdeňka said, taking a drag from her cigarette and exhaling. "Very good. Have you always been with the church?" "You're either born to the faith or you're not. There is no other way." Zdeňka said, her brow furrowing. "Right, I was aware of that." "Allow me to rephrase that. Have you always been so close to the church?" "Ah, that makes more sense. My faith has wavered in the past, but I feel it has been renewed in recent years." Zdeňka said, "Oh, why did it waver? Youthful rebellion, mostly. Unlike our rural kin, it's hard to escape the influence of outsiders. In my want for my own identity, I forgot the importance of preserving who we are. Assimilation is our people's greatest enemy." Zdeňka said, shrugging. "How did you go about that? Vegan diet, listening to straight-edge Christian punk rock. By the prophet, it was embarrassing. Not sure how much any of that related to my skepticism. Wasn't like I actually considered worshipping the Christ God. Was more about pissing off my parents. Maybe it was my faith in the church that wavered, not so much its truth. You know, the old rituals, the chanting, it can get pretty boring as a kid." Zdeňka said, her tone distant. "Has any other religion appealed to you? Don't worry. Not trying to convert you or anything. Just curious." Buddhists, I guess. They seem to have the same goal. The Buddha is a lot like the Asyamach. Well, that's how it read to me. Never actually met one." Zdeňka replied, "But your faith is strong now. How did that come about?" "My sister never doubted. Her faith was truly unshakable. She was beautiful too, blessed by Volutaar herself. We weren't close. I was jealous, my heart blackened with the vile envy of a diva." "I know this now," Zdeňka said. 3 years ago someone took her away. No, I shouldn't sanitize the truth. That's the way of the God-fearing." She spat on the ground. "They violated her, tore her apart, but she went down fighting. The bastards left her in an alley next to the garbage. Our flesh crafters couldn't save her. Maybe if we had our Karcist." "I'm sorry. I wish there was something I could do." Dr. Desmarais said, "Words are meaningless. They won't bring her back. But when I saw her broken body, I found my faith reignited, and I understood the ancient teachings with newfound clarity. Sarn becomes me, and my sister will soon be avenged." Zdeňka said, "Avenged. Never forgive, never forget. We tracked down those beasts, and in a few days they will face the judgment." Zdeňka replied, "I'm sorry, but I doubt the Foundation would allow it. Not unless I can convince them otherwise. Perhaps this can be negotiated. I am not authorized to make such arrangements, but I could make a request. Based on what little I know about the judgment, it could be a most educational opportunity. Dr. Desmarais said, "These are our secrets, our traditions, and you outsiders have no place in them. But if you truly believe that they would deny us, then—" Zdeňka hesitated. "Please do what you can. My sister, she needs this. It is our sacred duty to see this through. While our duty is to the preservation of normalcy, this has never stopped us from learning from anomalies in a controlled setting. Much remains unknown about Sarkic rituals, and we won't have such a chance with other sects. What we learn from this may even help us prevent similar anomalies in the future. The Divoši have hidden these practices for generations. Thus, I have no doubt that it can be conducted clandestinely. Though it may seem ghoulish, I do believe that allowing this ritual to proceed will be for the greater good, potentially leading to breakthroughs in how to best contain and/or terminate hostile Sarkic cultists and their anomalies. A formal request for authorization was approved by the O5 Council under the following conditions. Event is to be overseen by Project Citra. Captives held by the Divoši are to be classified as D-class personnel. Security is to be provided by MTFC-9, Abyss Gazers. Anomalies and anomalous phenomena are not allowed beyond the designated ritual site. Ritual site is to be installed with audio and video recording devices. In the likely event of anomalous corporeal generation or transmutation, tissue samples are to be secured and delivered to Foundation personnel. Majority of personnel are to observe the ritual indirectly, through the use of live video feed with a 30-second delay, a defense measure against possible cognitohazards. Official reports can be retrieved upon request, but certain files require Level 3 clearance or higher. The following represents my personal observations and opinions of the event, partially redacted as required by the O5 Council. The judgment, personal observations. This part is censored. Our guide led us by lantern light through nameless alleyways and hidden roads. The local architecture was old, possibly medieval and long forgotten by the rest of the city, a testament to the subtle power of the Irma. I caught fleeting glimpses of malformed figures in the shadows, and could not escape the feeling of being watched. They are the guardians, our guide informed us. Bring violence to this place, and you will know them well. A chill fog rolled in and engulfed the area in darkness. Still, we followed the lantern light. The environment grew increasingly exotic with each twist and turn of that urban labyrinth. Creeping tendrils of flesh climbed brick walls like ivy, sporting luminescent pustules at meter-length intervals. Buildings appeared warped, displaying crooked doorways and spiraled rooftops. The further we traveled, the more the structures resisted their very own geometry. It reminded me of a certain Foundation mathematician who once told me that such dimensional anomalies tend to loathe a right angle. Upward-pointing pikes surrounded us, displaying the impaled remains of historical foes. Among the dead, I see the rusted armor of knights, the ragged robes of inquisitors, and the uniforms of Honorb Obscuricorps field operatives. A grim reminder to behave ourselves while in Divoši territory. Our destination proved to be the source of that obfuscating mist, which effused from its chimneys like so much factory smog. Outside of this abnormality, the building otherwise resembled a Catholic cathedral, albeit one utterly bereft of any Christian iconography. The walls displayed a singular texture almost organic in nature, like something out of a Beksinski painting. I wondered to myself if the church had been built through standard artifice, or if it had been somehow shaped into its current appearance. And such questions allowed an especially disconcerting thought to enter my already anxious mind. Was the church, in fact, alive? I pondered this possibility, along with its numerous dread implications, all while unconsciously following the others inside. A great ribcage held up the ceiling, supported by pillars of bone resembling the femur of some mythic behemoth. Hovering overhead was a heart, human in shape but of impossible size. A cathedral of flesh and bone. I thought it might be decorative, or that was at least what I tried to convince myself. I received an answer to all my questions the moment I heard that colossal heart beat, the noise reverberating throughout the temple. A woman clad in leather took me by the hand and ushered me to the front. I remain unsure if this was an honor or if they were merely sick of my prying, as what I ultimately witnessed would dissuade most from further study. The sight of security personnel failed to make me feel any safer, but they, and the various video cameras and researchers, at least added some familiarity to an otherwise alien location. A man stood at the center of the chamber. He was an imposing figure, over 2 meters tall with at least 200 kilograms of muscle. He wore the traditional attire of a flesh shaper, resembling a stained butcher's apron over a crudely stitched leather kilt. His body was painted or tattooed with a number of Sarkic runes, and he carried an immense cleaver. The cleaver appears to lack a proper hilt, and its wielder's hands are bloody and scarred as a result. He wore a mask or helmet, as it does appear to cover the entirety of his head, resembling a rust-covered medieval torture device, which dug into the flesh and left his upper body soaked in blood. A woman entered the ritual site. Like her male counterpart, she wore the bare-chested attire of a flesh shaper, but instead carried a sickle. A bone mask covered the lower half of her face, resembling the jaws and teeth of an unknown predator and giving her a somewhat lupine appearance, though the teeth seemed more akin to those of a shark. Odd considering the landlocked nature of the Czech Republic. Her hair had been braided through the hollows of vertebrae, perhaps an aesthetic leftover of their tribal past. She was followed by another flesh shaper, a thin, almost cadaverous fellow of indeterminate sex. They carried a spear resembling some sort of chitinous spike and wore a distorted, asymmetrical mask, which appeared to be ejecting tendrils from its grossly gaping maw. The torches that lit the chamber were suddenly extinguished, and were slowly replaced by the queerly violet bioluminescence of thin organic threads dangling from the ceiling. This new light revealed the true depths of the structure, which descended down into a seemingly bottomless pit. Hanging over the chasm were numerous clay human effigies, though too small to contain an actual adult human. They were suspended in the air by those same creeping tendrils witnessed earlier, which wrapped around the throats of each effigy like a noose. Their purpose would remain unknown until the end of the ceremony. 3 individuals, all clearly bruised and beaten, were led to the center and chained to a pillar of bones. The 3 included 2 men and 1 woman. All were nude and had Sarkic runes carved into their flesh. Much of the following information was provided to me after the ritual had ended. The first, from left to right of my vantage point, was an overweight male carved with a rune meaning polluted devourer and another rune meaning defiler of autonomy, but augmented to express that said defiler targeted children. The prisoner was later identified as 54-year-old Petter, a wealthy heir to a redacted name, a lucrative financial company. Though he had been accused multiple times of sexual violence against children, including his own, he was able to avoid prison through the exploitation of a technicality by his legal team. He disappeared several weeks ago, presumably having fled the country under a false identity. To my surprise, none of his actions were committed against Divoši individuals, but they felt his judgment necessary. The second was an attractive woman carved with runes meaning oath breaker, serpent's venom, and diva's vanity. She was later identified as 30-year-old Clara, a model and former escort infamously known as a Black Widow for the possible murder of 3 husbands and 5 stepchildren. Though suspected of being involved in the other deaths, she was only on trial for the murder of her latest husband along with 2 young stepdaughters. She was found not guilty due to lack of evidence. It was later discovered that she had been having an affair with her own prosecutor, who possessed significant evidence of her guilt, but refused to use it. She disappeared several months ago, shortly after buying 2 plane tickets bound for the USA. Like the previous subject, her crimes had nothing to do with the Divoši. The last was a young male carved with runes meaning defiler of autonomy, ripper of flesh, and Archon's cruelty. He was later identified as 22-year-old Jacob, a man with a long and violent criminal history. More importantly, he was the one responsible for the rape and murder of Ms. Slováčková's sister. His body language seemed oddly defiant, considering his current circumstances. The female flesh-shaper began to recite in a Dittite, pointing at their prisoners as she unveiled their litany of crimes. The thin flesh-shaper drove their spear into the leftmost captive, eliciting a pained cry. The crowd began to chant, bellowing a low and guttural noise. The large flesh-shaper lifted his cleaver and shouted in an unintelligible tongue. The captive's abdomen swelled before violently rupturing, with internal matter spilling over in a most grotesque manner. A disconcerting transformation had occurred at one of the openings, suggesting a twisted mockery of nature. The female flesh-shaper turned to the center captive and began to disfigure the victim's face. I could hardly hear all the screams beneath the endless droning of the chanters and the sharp, visceral shouts of the ritualists. The cleaver struck the rightmost captive, leaving a grievous wound, yet all the captives remained conscious despite the mounting damage. In a horrifying display, bodily matter was forced through one captive, merging grotesquely with that of another. The flesh-shapers continued their brutal actions as the victims appeared to merge together. How were they still alive? It was beyond anything I had ever seen before. The grotesque performance became too much for me, and I began to retch. I stumbled from my seat, my hands and knees on the blood-slick floor as I vomited. I took some comfort in the knowledge that I was not the only researcher rendered incapacitated by the sights and sounds of that living nightmare. Even security personnel appeared ill-prepared for what ultimately transpired. The flesh-shapers handed their tools to a number of approaching assistants, and then proceeded to bury their hands deep into the screaming mass, causing it to stretch and shrink, tear and repair before my very eyes. And then the ritual became truly surreal. The mound of living flesh contorted into a chaotic cluster of tendrils and bone. That horrible thing reacted to the motions of the ritualists, fusing the 3 and molding them into a new, increasingly degenerate form. I vomited again and lost consciousness. When I awoke, I beheld the fruit of their terrible craft. I never should have agreed to this. I expected maybe an execution, but this was truly beyond the pale. It had no mouth with which to eat or, more appropriately, to scream. It appeared weak and helpless, lacking the strength to defy its fate. I felt an urge to end its suffering, yet the ritualists interfered. With a flick of their wrist, the thin flesh-shaper beckoned one of the effigy-carrying tendrils, which lowered its prize. The female flesh-shaper removed a cork from a hole in the clay effigy's top, releasing writhing, insect-like creatures. The large flesh-shaper then lifted up their newest creation and disposed of it within the effigy, trapping it with the rest of its kind. The cork was replaced, and the tendril returned the effigy to its original location, where it has no doubt remained for hundreds of years. By the number of jars, there may be thousands of them. It would be merciful to burn them all. These individuals were once accused of heinous crimes, people whose only nature was to spread suffering. Are the same people still inside those pitiable forms 3 atrocious minds, forced to forever share a single miserable body? To punish the wicked, the Sarkites have created a corporeal hell. I cannot look at the Divoši the same way after that ordeal, and I fear this will harm my impartiality in any future dealings. Was this justice? My liberal educated mind says no, but am I, from my place of privilege and comfort, really able to judge them so harshly? I will meditate on this, but it is unlikely that I will ever find a satisfying answer. Interview subject: Karcist Nakiakken, April 28th. Interviewed: Karcist Nakiakken. Interviewer: Dr. Matthew Desmarais. Though I've studied Sarkicism for nearly a decade, this is to be my first encounter with an actual Karcist. The subject is held within a psi-resistant humanoid containment cell, and we are to communicate via intercom. Subject resembles their portrait, though said portrait failed to capture their lower half, which appears structurally serpentine but pale and scaleless like the rest of its body. The subject appears to have 4 cadaverous arms of considerable length, and include appropriately large hands, each palm tattooed with a stylistic humanoid eye, equipped with 6 long, spindly fingers. They are wearing an orange jumpsuit customized for their inhuman anatomy. Their face displays no discernible emotion prior to the start of the interview. "It is an honor to meet you, Karcist Nakiakken," Dr. Desmarais said. "Is it?" Karcist Nakiakken replied. It was at this time that Dr. Desmarais felt something prying within his mind. "You are not well. The judgment has left you haunted. Tell me, how does it make you feel? You must have questions." A second voice spoke, but it was from within, questions whose answers you fear to learn. Dr. Desmarais hesitated, stunned by the reach of Nakiakken's power. "Why, your people could have simply executed them. It would be over with, and they'd never be able to hurt another. I don't even support the death penalty, but it would be better than an eternity as those creatures. They won't die, will they? The powerful and the cruel must be cut down to size. Is that how that phrase goes?" Karcist Nakiakken asked. "And why would we return them to the cycle when they have yet to learn remorse? We give them a form and place that limits all but thought. And we grant them a spark of our power, for they will live forever. But if they learn remorse for their countless atrocities, then they can return, and we will teach them what it is to be righteous." "Do you mean they could transform, return to human, Do you have any evidence? Dr. Desmarais asked. We stripped from them their humanity. Karcist Nakiakken said, but the shepherds sacrificed their blood to their designs. The judged contain the essence of the old blood, and through the ways of Nadox, we have created a lock whose key is repentance. The words echoed in Dr. Desmarais's mind. Drain sin from the veins, scourge evil from the flesh, obliterate the tumors of arrogance, greed, and cruelty. Visceral images of cancerous flesh and infected wounds assaulted his mind. Has anyone returned? Dr. Desmarais asked, trying to regain control. I know of only 3. Karcist Nakiakken replied. Many hundreds have been judged, but only 3 underwent metamorphosis and returned to us as human. One was a bandit, another a tyrant, while the last burned witches. Perhaps the others will in time, but these 3 redeemed required centuries. The voice echoed again. The caterpillar struggles within the cocoon. Not all will break free and transcend. Dr. Desmarais saw moths or butterflies floating in his peripheral vision, bursting into flames and disappearing. And what of the evil you inflict? What I beheld was sadistic. It was torture, plain and simple. Dr. Desmarais asked. There is no malice in the judgment. Karcist Nakiakken replied. Without knowing suffering, one cannot know empathy. Without empathy, they will never find redemption. The voice spoke again. Take off your mask. Reveal your true face. Dr. Desmarais quickly grabbed his face, suddenly feeling as though it was sliding off. You're monsters, Dr. Desmarais said, his voice shaky. He immediately regretted his words. This was entirely unprofessional, and I fully apologize for my actions. Such naivety, Karcist Nakiakken said, such foolishness. Dr. Desmarais's vision began to blur and distort. Get out of my head. Dr. Desmarais demanded. I am not your enemy, Dr. Desmarais. Karcist Nakiakken said, I simply desire your honesty. You have limited knowledge of the Foundation. Let us say that our monsters pale in comparison to the horrors your associates have unleashed upon the world. The voice echoed again. Ah, but always for the greater good. That is what they repeat, letting it wash over them again and again. A simple self-deception to sleep so much better at night. Dr. Desmarais saw a mountain of corpses, the dead wearing orange jumpsuits, presumably D-class personnel. You have no proof. Why should I believe you? Dr. Desmarais said. Karcist Nakiakken reply was expunged. I've had enough of this. Dr. Desmarais said, his voice strained. I apologize if my words caused you offense, but if you wish to speak again, you need to show some restraint. I want to understand your culture and beliefs. I really do. And I assumed that was why you desired to see me. Karcist Nakiakken reply was expunged. Please, someone amplify the psi inhibitors and get me out of here. Dr. Desmarais said urgently, I had hoped for a different experience. I am far away from Site 486 and, hopefully, far enough from their reach. Having time to reflect, should I be surprised that an entity we've caged for decades hates us so? I was told information. Information I wasn't meant to know. The Foundation saw fit to remove that knowledge. A necessary action for the greater good. Let it be known that I continue to believe in our mission, and that the subject failed to dissuade me from our great work. Reflecting on my previous interview with a secret SCP, I could not help but feel that it was I who initiated hostilities. The added stress of the classified SCP's unique manner of communication, combined with the disturbing memories of the judgment, rendered me psychologically unfit for the interview. I have communicated with the classified SCP via a number of letters, and we have agreed to a second interview. The Karcist ultimately has information that I will not be able to obtain anywhere else. Interview subject: Karcist Nakiakken, May 14th. Interviewed: Karcist Nakiakken. Interviewer: Dr. Matthew Desmarais. My second interview with the subject, hopefully resulting in a more fortuitous outcome. Hello, Karcist Nakiakken. A few basic questions first. When were you born and under what name? Dr. Desmarais asked. I was born to the name Alberich in 764 CE, according to the calendar of your people. Karcist Nakiakken replied. Were you born in Prague? Nay. I was born to a village in the Black Forest, within the borders of what is now Germany. Karcist Nakiakken said, Charles the Butcher, king of godsmen, sword of archons, my village razed, I still taste the ashes. My family fills my lungs. He shuddered, though the sensation seemed more like a memory. I know it was an illusion, but I could actually smell the odor of burning bodies and feel the heat of the flames. An empathic anomaly. I'm sorry. I had no intention of. Dr. Desmarais began. No apology is necessary. It is all ancient history. Karcist Nakiakken interrupted, placing one of his hands over his face and forehead. The few that survived lived as refugees. Our Karcist sacrificed herself so that we might live. I was her student while she learned under Nadox himself. How I envied her to learn at the feet of a claviger. And Nadox, greatest of them all, the prophet's most trusted. Your teacher, what was she like? Karcist Viekudh was wise, kind, and charismatic. A skilled diplomat, she aided the Saxons in the creation of the Irminsul and earned their alliance until they too fell to the butcher. Karcist Nakiakken said, I saw the defiled temple in the back of my mind. Was it truly anomalous? And in what manner? Without it, the Saxons fell, they would bend to the cross or perish. Godsman carries a pejorative connotation to you and your people. But the pagans certainly worshipped gods as well, yet you appear to regard them in a positive light. Dr. Desmarais noted, and we disagreed with their faith, but there was respect between our people. They had no desire to convert us to their way. Karcist Nakiakken replied, or to set us aflame. He paused. It is the nature of godsmen to convert or destroy all non-believers, blood and obedience to feed the outer horrors, a cosmic tragedy for all eternity. A wave of dread passed over him, though it lacked any imagery or sensations. That is a despairing view of the universe. Dr. Desmarais remarked. Such is reality, Karcist Nakiakken said softly. Death feeds the altar, death feeds the beasts, and digests our souls until nothing remains. When your people came to Prague, were they welcomed? Dr. Desmarais asked. Indifference was the only welcome we desired, and, for the most part, that is what we received. The Bohemians are an irreligious people. Though ignorant of our true reality, we respect their defiance. Karcist Nakiakken replied, But there were other godsmen, weren't there? Always outsiders, hunters of witches and heathens. Though my power was great, we suffered losses. I could not protect them all. Karcist Nakiakken said, I used their bones to build my church. His voice trailed off, and later, Hitler's paladins. Do you regard the Nazis as godsmen? While most were Christian, I do not believe they killed in the name of religion. Dr. Desmarais asked, Most do not notice the machinations that guide them. To create such a sacrifice, I see no other purpose in it. Karcist Nakiakken replied, The outer horrors lead with an invisible hand, their evil beyond comprehension. A powerful sense of dread washed over him again. Did you ever befriend or associate with non-Divoši? Dr. Desmarais inquired. Yes. That is somewhat of a surprise, considering the lengths your people have gone to remain hidden. Who were these individuals? Dr. Desmarais asked. Mr. D. and Sir Kelly came to see me. Karcist Nakiakken said, I nearly devoured them. He chuckled darkly. Such gall to divine my location. Ah, but we parted as friends. They were eager students, but I did not teach them all our secrets. Anyone else? Dr. Desmarais asked. There is one. Though I love my children, they regard me in such a way that it renders honest conversation difficult. I have no desire to be praised and pampered. Karcist Nakiakken said, Go on. His name was Judah. A child of Abraham and the leading rabbi of Prague, he was known to his people as the Maharal. Much like D. and Kelly, he was a seeker of truth, ever eager to unravel the infinite mysteries. Karcist Nakiakken paused. A philosopher and a mystic following the path of knowledge wherever it took him. You miss him, Dr. Desmarais observed. Yes, a wound that never heals. Karcist Nakiakken's voice softened. We were kindred spirits. He was eager to understand the nature of life, hoping to replicate it. He ignored much of my advice, assured in his belief that the flesh was the domain of his God. Still, he had hoped to achieve similar with more basic matter. How proud he was of his creation, that golem. His voice turned bitter. But clay, so inefficient, so inferior. The melancholy replaced the dread. The golem of Prague, it is a famous legend, but I assumed it was only a legend. There is a statue of its creator at City Hall. Judah Low, Ben something or another. Dr. Desmarais said, Judah Low Ben Bezalel. I have visited the statue many times through the eyes of others. Karcist Nakiakken said, I offered him a chance at immortality, but the fool was stubborn. He told me he was ready to meet his Maker. No one is ready, not if they knew the true depths of oblivion. Death comes for us all in the end, Dr. Desmarais remarked. But it need not be that way, Karcist Nakiakken replied. The cycle can be broken, the wheel can be shattered. But how? How are some of your kind able to achieve this? Dr. Desmarais asked. The great work is not achieved through obtaining immortality. The great work is achieved through tearing mortality from the flesh. Karcist Nakiakken said, Those sound the same to me, Dr. Desmarais noted. Mortality is not a necessary aspect of life. It is a curse, forcibly woven into the essence. Karcist Nakiakken explained, Essence? Your kind calls them genes. The outer horrors do not wish their children to rival them, for we are destined for the altar. And thus, a curse of doom, a curse of ending, a fail-safe to ensure that all are devoured. Karcist Nakiakken trailed off. But my deathless nature cannot protect me from the end of all things. What is that? Dr. Desmarais asked. It is not my desire to reveal the full nature of our faith to you. Karcist Nakiakken said, Though I admire your hunger for knowledge, you know only a fraction of our truth. Being witness to the judgment has done you a disservice, biasing your opinions towards the old conclusions of your predecessors. We are not a flesh cult. Yes, the term repeats within your mind over and over. He paused. The flesh is but a tool. a divine curse we have learned to conquer and control, a dagger turned from the sacrifice towards the heart of its wielder. Is there something we should be worried about? Dr. Desmarais asked. I have said enough, Karcist Nakiakken replied. I politely ask that you take your leave of this place. I will respect your request. Thank you for your time, Dr. Desmarais said. As I left Site 486, I was overcome by a terrible headache, followed by dizziness and the sudden loss of consciousness. I awoke to find myself at the site's medical ward and a memory implanted within my mind. There is something important buried beneath the Black Forest of Germany, something Karcist Nakiakken wants me to find but could not tell me directly for reasons unknown. Clearly, I would report this to the Foundation. So it wasn't as if he feared the Foundation learning this information. So, if not the Foundation, who or what does the Karcist fear? With this newfound information, I traveled to Germany with a team of Foundation archaeologists. After several days of digging, we discovered the ruins of a village employing a distinct bone-based architecture. Skeletal remains were found as well, along with a significant amount of ashes and charred debris. It was concluded that the location had been the site of a massacre and that the village had been intentionally razed. Abnormal remains were discovered among the dead, displaying both humanoid and servine traits and ascent, or like build, along with other mutations indicative of a Karcist. The bones were held together by an oily black substance with the consistency and adhesiveness of firm tar, preserving the shape and pose of the body at their time of death. The body was positioned on all four knees, with its head lowered and its arms wrapped around an unknown object. The remains were exhumed and delivered to Site 282 for autopsy, leading to the discovery of a number of rusted arrowheads and sword blades lodged in the body. It has been hypothesized that these remains belong to the late Karcist Viekudh, who, according to Divoši records, was murdered by Christian soldiers, presumably under the orders of Charlemagne in 774 CE. A stone puzzle box was extracted from the remains, something that the Karcist presumably died while protecting. Sarkic puzzle boxes have been discovered before at archaeological sites and among the private collections of neo-Sarkic cultists, and are considered extremely dangerous due to the presence of anomalous traps, triggered by failed attempts. Fortunately, these deterrents, normally the release of chemical or biological agents, were designed to infect living organisms and have no impact on inorganic materials. This has allowed the Foundation to solve the puzzle box via a remotely controlled machine in a sterilized and sealed environment. The puzzle box was found to contain the following: a bone flute. Object appears to be non-anomalous and was likely secured within the container for sentimental reasons. Listeners have described music produced by this instrument as somber and hauntingly beautiful. A golden sickle. The Roman historian Tacitus reported that golden sickles were used in Druidic rituals. As Sarkic weapons and tools are traditionally crafted from bone and similarly tough organic materials, it is hypothesized that the golden sickle was a gift, possibly from the Saxons. A wicker doll. Object appears to be non-anomalous. Similar to the flute, it is hypothesized that the object was of sentimental value. The Black Forest Codices. The codices are a collection of 13 ancient scrolls written in an unknown language whose symbols regularly change shape through some anomalous means. Though the script is unfamiliar to the Foundation, It employs several symbols encountered in both Sarkic and Divite writing systems. The scrolls are crafted from the hide of an unknown animal and have been dated to approximately 1100 BCE. Analysis of the ink suggests that it is primarily, if not entirely, composed of blood. Efforts to translate the Black Forest codices have coincided with a number of anomalous incidents, and they have since been reclassified as a classified SCP. Many of these scrolls contain the seal of Nadox, the doom song of Karcist Viekudh, a scroll inscribed with the writings of Karcist Viekudh. The document has been dated to approximately 600 CE. It has been translated from late Hittite and provided below. The doom song of Karcist Viekudh, 1. Son Juxi. Darkness came to me and whispered, "Death is thy familiar." I declared this a falsehood, and proclaimed before darkness the true name of the prophet, for death held no dominion over my spirit. And darkness laughed, and took me by the hand, to guide my way through the forest of impalement, and into the swamp of forgotten things, until the waters became clear, and without impurity, and darkness said, "Look upon these waters." Thus I gazed upon their surface, and in my reflection I found decay, flayed of skin and carved of flesh, and my skull anointed with sacred oil. And darkness held my face to the sky, where I beheld 6 red stars aligned, in the most abominable of omens, and I fell to my knees in anguish, as I turned again to face the darkness in fear of this dread portent. And darkness shed its shadow skin, and began to consummate and consume itself from the blood and seed of this defiance of nature. The grand Karcist was reborn, and he said unto me, "See as I have, my child, through eyes unbound by the shackles of time." And the prophet tore the eyes from his skull, and placed them within mine, so that I might know his truth. And I beheld my kindred, hanging lifeless from the killing tree, immolated by blasphemous flame, and beneath this atrocity there resided a stranger wrapped in the fantastic colors of their tattered robe and mantle, a heavy hood and golden crown beshadowed, all aspects save grey lips curled into a deceiver's poisoned grin, revealing a visage of decay, and 3 venom-soaked tongues writhing to the rhythm of a distant drum. My limbs refused to heed my call, allowing me neither the paths of predator or prey. And if the stranger held dominion over these bones, I remember the foreboding scent of burning flesh and wicker as my soul was set aflame, leaving naught but oblivion and the ceaseless disharmony of that hated drum. 2. Son Sarasati. Oblivion pulled me close and whispered in my ear, prying old memories from the depths of my fragile and half-mad mind, and I remembered a curious tale older than the Archons. How unfortunate is the ken of man, unable to relate to the cosmos and planes, save through the simplest of allegories, though perhaps this is a mercy, for man is a bestial creature, far too similar to its blind progenitor. The tale itself is inscribed within the blood, and tells the story of nature, and her rape at the hands of chaos. Her womb defiled by his disease, she would give birth to a stillborn universe, a failed and fallen creation. Her offspring scream for a mother who will not answer, consumed by hunger unending. 3. Son Sodasika. I awaken to a familiar world, bound to an unfamiliar eon, governed by smoke and metal, like that of the brazen men of long-concluded wars, and still I heard that ceaseless rhythm. Like the drums of a warmonger's charge, the power of the gods has been seized, but it has been turned upon their own, and thus the many fall for worthless glory, among the mud and excrement, a feast for the corpse-eaters, to satisfy the desires of tyrants, and all throughout there does persist the mad rhythm of that terrible drum, as I watch iron beasts adapt and evolve. Among ever-shifting battlefields, a yellow miasma suffocates and blisters, as profane fire rains from the sky. I called for any who would hear me, demanding to know the purpose behind such bloodshed, and the grand Karcist appeared before me, and revealed unto me a most abominable truth. The world is an altar, and each death is a sacrifice to the ravenous gods of suffering and pain. And he once again took me by the hand, guiding my way through fields of fire and bone, and to the top of a mountain of corpses. Despite the horrors of the world below, the stars were beautiful that night, and the grand Karcist directed my gaze towards the worm of midnight, and I saw that which was once hidden, beholding a great rift where not a single star did exist. And with terror I watched the darkness expand, a long shadow cast across the cosmos, an unspeakable cancer, until every last light had died. And it was here that I remembered the ominous words of Nadox, who warned that the coming of the Archons would be presaged, not by the moon and stars, but by the festering of the void, cold and black and infinite. And a deluge of visions flooded my mind, of shattered worlds and devoured races, violence and perversion beyond man's comprehension, across the cosmos and all realities and every iteration. Seed time was over, the harvest had begun. I see no more, for I am blind, in the face of such hopelessness. End of Case Study 2, The Divoši of Prague. An Anthropological Approach to Sarkicism. Dr. Isabel Beaumont, Department of Anthropology. Case Study 3, The Darkwater Lodge. Io Engio Eni Vaya, Io, which is God, multiplied itself like mushrooms. The Darkwater Lodge is the modern moniker assumed by the long-standing alliance and intermarriage between the two large Sabatier and Duvernay families. Originally from the Akan peoples of the area now known as Ghana, it is believed that the heads of the two families immigrated to the United States during the period of the transatlantic slave trade sometime in the late 16th century. This group differs from most other Neo-Sarkic cults in that their principally Nel'lkan religious practices represent a fusion of Nel'lka with other West African religious rituals. While this is superficially similar to how such beliefs form the core of more recent religious evolutions, such as Voodoo and Santeria, the fusion that has given rise to the Lodge appears to have happened prior to the immigration of the Darkwater families to the local area. The original families of the Lodge first integrated with the Akan peoples sometime during the Sarkic diaspora, between 1200 to 1000 BCE. They represent a commingling of both haplogroup NM23-1, a Y chromosome DNA haplogroup typical of northern Eurasia, along with haplogroup L2, AMT-DNA, which is more typical of Western Africa. A majority of their own knowledge of this time period comes from oral traditions passed down from family head to family head, and much of the knowledge of their Aditite history has been lost along with most of their stories of their Akan heritage. The progenitors of the Lodge arrived on the North American continent sometime between 1675 and 1695. The oral traditions are specific enough to pinpoint this time period, but only through comparison of similar progenitor folk stories that exist within other cultural groups that trace their existence to the same period. The earliest tales within the lodge tell of violence and death on a scale that is also substantiated through the record of various slave revolts and the subsequent military actions that were required to stamp them out. From these tales, we can ascertain that the group originally settled on the Caribbean island of St. John in the Danish West Indies under the leadership of an individual that is only referred to as Nsämanf'tsatsa. Their time in the West Indies was exceptionally violent. According to the same tales, as well as others collected from other cultural groups, the lodge was primarily made up of Nsämanf'tsatsa and what we believe was their Holocaust. They were involved in multiple slave uprisings and revolts, though it is of particular note that the goal of this original Karcist was the brutal murder of the white slave owners rather than the emancipation of the local slave population. There are numerous reports in both the lodge's lore and in others that the Nsäman routinely used the local population to further their own desire to wreak havoc on the white landowners, and would do nothing to prevent the retribution meted out on the slave populations. These violent and bloody actions culminated in the 1733 slave insurrection. Led by an Akwamu chief, King June, a foreman on one of the Danish estates, Nsäman and several other leaders were able to gain control of the majority of the island of St. John and proceeded to brutally murder the white population. The tales go on to say that this was insufficient to sate Nsäman's bloodlust, as the Karcist continued its rampage onto the slave population, murdering and raping a full third of the population before it was stopped by King June and a few others. What happened after is unclear, but the slave revolt was ultimately put down by several hundred French and Swiss troops sent from Martinique in April 1734. After this insurrection, the lodge moved to the mainland and settled near the newly formed city of New Orleans, where the lodge remains to this day. There are not many tales from this time period, and it is unclear whether or not Nsämanf'tsatsa fully recovered from its ouster from St. John. What is clear is that at some point in the late 1700s, there was significant disruption within the hierarchy of the family group, resulting in the structure that we see now. Nsämanf'tsatsa, the titular head of the Sabatier family, is the primary leading voice within the lodge and has assumed the mantle of Karcist for the cult. This change in leadership is not much discussed by the members of the lodge, but it has resulted in significant deviation from their original purpose. Largely, the distinction between what constitutes a neo-Sarkic cult from a proto-Sarkic one is not entirely applicable here. It is clear that the original leadership of the lodge preferred the much more direct approach to apotheoses that is generally found in other neo-Sarkic sects, but the current Karcist appears to operate with significantly greater discretion. As it stands, the Darkwater Lodge exhibits traits that are common to both classifications of Sarkic cults, though their past history has led the department, and through them the Overwatch Command, to remain satisfied with its current classification. The Lodge are all adherents to a religion that they refer to as Nel'lka, or just Nel'lka, while the majority of their closely held religious practices bear significant resemblance to what we would consider mainline Nel'lkan religious practices. Many of the names of their revered deities have been changed to or merged with traditionally Akum religious deities. The primary pantheon of deities includes Nsäman, their progenitor deity, creator of the world, typically depicted as an amorphous entity with multiple eyes and mouths. The Noroxi Naharjitsa, the seven butchers of chaos, the fountains of power, Dea, Biu, Uku, Hoodoo, Biar, Shida, and Bakwai. Nyamb, or Nyam, the first human, guardian of creation, the drafter of new peoples, typically depicted as an elongated human with both male and female attributes. Some include the tail of a fish in the place of feet and legs. Vośňa, the god of the dead, judge of the afterlife, typically depicted as a powerfully built male with horns, grasping a shepherd's crook and wearing a crown. Asas-ya, wife of Vośňa, goddess of death, the knife of judgment, typically depicted as a feminine figure clothed in an occluding robe and holding a bared knife. The population of the Darkwater Lodge is currently made up of approximately 49 individuals. 22 members of the Sabatier family headed by Enitin Sabatier, 18 members of the Duvernay family headed by Enu Duvernay, and 9 lesser-ranked individuals who have joined the lodge over the years. While Enitin and Enu operate as an exclusively married couple, their children remain independent members of the two separate families. While all of the Sabatier and Duvernay children claim to be progeny of the union between Enitin and Enu, they each carry genetic material of one or the other, not both. How this is achieved is currently unknown. Overall, the lodge members practice their particular form of Nel'lka in the relative peace and seclusion offered by their citizenship within La Rue Macabre. In this aspect, they more closely resemble other proto-Sarkic sects, though their specific religious adherence is more closely aligned with what has been found in Neo-Sarkicism. While they are following the path of personal apotheoses as laid out by Grand Karcist Ion, their version of the Volutaar includes the directive to proceed further along the path of apotheoses and to eventually supplant Nyam as the guardian creation. According to their Volutaar, Nyam was cast down during a great conflagration, cast out by Nyamian for being insufficient for the task set to them by the Creator. The Lodge considers Nsämanf'tsatsa to have been equally cast out by Nyamian, though for different reasons. Interview with Volutaar Enu Duvernay. Audio log transcript. Date November 29, 2012 at 5:20 p.m. Interviewer: Dr. Isabelle Beaumont. Interviewed: Volutaar Enu Duvernay. Gaining an interview with the Volutaar is quite the feat. While not quite as important as Enitin Sabatier in the hierarchy of the Darkwater Lodge, Enu Duvernay is the keeper of the Lodge's lore and holds a position of religious authority within the sect that may be equal to that of the Karcist. Dr. Isabelle Beaumont greeted her interviewee with a polite smile. "Good evening, Ms. Duvernay, or should I say Mrs. Sabatier, I do not wish to be rude." Enu Duvernay let out a light laugh. Ms. Duvernay is fine if we must be formal. Enu works as well. I do not stand on protocol with Bakata. "Oh, K. Ms. Duvernay." Dr. Beaumont continued. "First, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I appreciate that your people would prefer to remain secluded, and I understand the great trust you have shown in me." "Of course, Dr. Beaumont," Duvernay replied warmly. "Manmanat Howe speaks quite highly of you. Her praise does not come lightly, so you must truly be special." Dr. Beaumont hesitated for a moment before responding. I'm not sure what to say to that. Thank you. It is always nice to be recognized for one's work." There was a brief rustling of papers before she continued. Now, if I may, I'd like to discuss with you a bit about your history. I understand that you are the keeper of the lodge's oral tradition. I suppose you could look at it that way, Dr. Beaumont, Duvernay said thoughtfully. I am the keeper of the tales primarily because I remember most of them. We have not needed to pass the stories from mother to daughter in quite some time. She paused briefly before adding, so yes, for your purposes I am. Dr. Beaumont nodded. Well, that should certainly make this easier then. I am curious about the time after you first arrived on this side of the Atlantic. I know that your people would rather not speak of those times. They have all referred me to you. Duvernay's expression darkened. Those were dark days indeed. Those are unpleasant memories for my people. We do not like to dwell upon them. Nsämanf'tsatsa led us then, though his eyes were clouded by hate, and his steps were no longer guided by Nsäman. She fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words lingering in the air. Dr. Beaumont hesitated before offering, if you would rather, we can speak on other things. No, Duvernay interrupted firmly. I think it important that we face our sins, learn from them. She took a deep breath before continuing. In those days we were hunted. Before, Naaman was the son of a holy man, a leader among all the tribes of the Akken. When first we came across, we had been tricked, sold onto the ships of the Sandra by those wise ones who were jealous of Naaman's father and his close walk with Nsäman. When we sailed, we were told it would be to a new world, where Naaman would share of Nsäman to our peoples who had already sailed. She paused, her expression unreadable. It became clear very quickly that this was not how it was to be. Naaman was beaten without mercy, chained in the bottom of the ship, held mostly submerged beneath the offal of all those trapped within. It was there his hate grew, in quiet stories told in whispers while huddled in a stinking ship, surrounded by the dead and dying. It was in those stories that we heard the corruption of Sarkicism, the butchers. She let the silence stretch between them before finally continuing. And when we landed, Naaman stepped free from the boat. The white devils nothing but empty husks behind. Dr. Beaumont's voice was quiet when she asked, "So you were not brought here as slaves?" "Oh yes, we were slaves," Duvernay confirmed with a bitter smile. "Maybe not to the Portuguese or the Danish, but we were still slaves, and Naaman held our collars." Dr. Isabel Beaumont regarded her interviewee thoughtfully. "Is that why he was so violent after?" "Perhaps in part," Enu Duvernay admitted. "The call of the Sarkicism is an alluring one, chaotic, corrupt. To pull upon their power is to pull upon their corruption. The taint of their evil is close to the surface. It is easy to gain strength, but not so easy to avoid the call of that abyss. Naaman was already so full of hate and rage. Hatred towards both the Sandra, but also to the others, those that tricked him. Dr. Beaumont nodded, considering her words, which is why he didn't try and protect the other slaves. He did not care what color their skin was, Duvernay explained. He cared only about his hate. Eventually, we could no longer even call it vengeance. It was murder, plain and simple. When June led his uprising, we thought that things would be different. After, when the whites had all been killed, Naaman would not stop, could not stop. So many of our brothers and sisters fell to his knife, to his call, to his holocaust. She paused for a long moment, her expression heavy with memory. Dr. Beaumont hesitated. "We do not have to continue if you would rather speak on something else." "You are kind, but no. "I must finish this," Duvernay said firmly. "We tell this to our children, so they know the danger of drawing too much upon the Nsämanf'tsatsa." She took a deep breath before continuing. I was not able to stop him. I tried, but I was just a girl then, not strong enough. It was Akwashi and Brefu that finally stopped Nsäman, though the effort cost both of them their lives. They fought for several days, and many of the Holocaust were used up in the struggle. In the end, Nsämanf'tsatsa lay wounded, Akwashi was dead, and Brefu was much diminished. When the soldiers came, she had not the strength to hold them, and she took her own life. Dr. Beaumont's voice softened. "Brefu was your mother. She was Volutaar before me, Nsäman's only confidant." Duvernay confirmed. He raged at her betrayal, but she had cursed him, given him a sickness. Nsäman touched her, gave her the strength to end Nsäman's bloodlust, but not enough to stop his bloodlust. It was then that I began to whisper the secrets of Nel'lka to Enitin. He was a boy then, younger even than me, but he would grow. Together, with the few Holocaust that remained, we carried Nsäman from that place. Dr. Beaumont tilted her head slightly. "It was then that you came here. Not to here, but to some place similar," Duvernay corrected. "I doubt Papa Legba and the others would have accepted us with Nsäman still as Karcist. That came later." "After Mr. Sarbitir?" Beaumont asked. "Yes, my lovely Enitin," Duvernay said wistfully. "When we arrived here in the place near to this, he was such a help in getting us settled. We had to hide, find a way to fit in with those few communities that were here at the time. Nsäman would fade in and out of lucidity, but mostly he would lay upon his mat in the heat and rant. It was Enitin that helped set up our small village, did most of the fishing, traded with the plantations. We became the Sarbitir and the Duvernay almost overnight." She sighed. "We were a small commune, but too many to pass as a single family. Nsäman had lost control over the Holocaust, and they were disoriented, lost. He had never let them think much for themselves, and now they had forgotten how. Enitin helped there, too. I taught him enough of how to draw upon Nsämanf'tsatsa to save them, to take away their fear. It definitely made it easier to have their help in keeping us fed." Dr. Beaumont leaned forward slightly. "How did the other immigrants in the area react to you?" "The other slaves, you mean," Duvernay corrected gently. "It was fine for a while. They would trade secretly with us, share some of what they brought in during harvest. Some of them taught us how to plant and harvest for ourselves. We met the Natau during that time, and their kindness saved our family after." Dr. Beaumont's brow furrowed. "After?" Duvernay exhaled slowly. "Eventually the other slaves grew resentful of our freedom. I'll never know what exactly happened. Maybe Enitin was too bold. Maybe one of the plantation slaves wanted to gain favor with their masters. It didn't matter, the result was the same." She took a long breath before finishing. "They came in the night, raided our village with fire, the gun, and the sword. They burned our fields, our homes, and they woke Nsämanf'tsatsa. No, no more. I have shared enough truth for today." Dr. Beaumont nodded. "All right. Would you like to pick up later, then?" "Yes, that would be better." Duvernay agreed. "Thank you, Ms. Duvernay." It is interesting to note that while the Volutaar speaks so carefully about not drawing upon the Archons, it is clear that she has done so extensively. Her appearance is still that of a young girl, despite her obvious age. The Manmas Natau are much older in appearance, and I wonder now if that is by choice, or their approach to Lihakutakal precludes the use of it so extensively upon themselves. The lodge celebrates several holy days. all centered around the cycle of purification and cleansing. The primary Nel'lka festival is the Aquacity Festival, a 40-day season of celebration which culminates in a purification rite called Adwira. Whether by coincidence or design, this season now coincides directly with the Mardi Gras month-long festivities. This ritual is of paramount significance to the lodge and has both public and private elements. The public portions of the ritual revolve mostly around visitation with their ancestors, which appears to be quite literal. Each 10th night during the festival, one of the lower-ranking members of the lodge will undergo ritual cleansing and will be anointed as a vessel for one of the lodge's ancestors. This portion of the ritual involves 10 days of self-mortification and excess, which daily includes hours of manual labor, extensive bouts of ritual mortification of the flesh, and celebrating long into the night. At the end of the 10-day period, the celebrant is nearly dead from exhaustion and blood loss. It is then that the celebrant is taken into the larger of the two residential structures, where they meet privately with the Karcist and the Volutaar. If the celebrant is not acceptable at the end of this period, they will be marked with a series of ritual scars, and they will not be allowed to attempt again for an indeterminate period of time, and will no longer take part in the remainder of the festival. If the celebrant is found to be an acceptable vessel, they will re-emerge as a host for one of the lodge's ancestors, which they will carry for the next several days. This period is marked with more celebration and excess, eventually leading to the host returning to the big house with the Karcist, from whence they will not return. Observations on the Nsämanf'tsatsa ritual. Event log. Date February 12th to 13th, 2013. Observer Dr. Isabel Beaumont. Event Private Nsämanf'tsatsa ritual held at the Big House, Darkwater Lodge Compound, La Rue Macabre. 9:11 p.m. All this week, I've been spending a lot of time at the Darkwater compound, taking notes about the Aquacity Festival. Despite being so closed-mouthed about their private rituals, the Darkwater people are really quite warm and inviting. Just as the celebration outside have increased in intensity over the last several days leading up to Mardi Gras, so have the celebrations in La Rue Macabre begun to reach ever more frantic heights. There are what amounts to parades every night, processions of what must be everyone in Rue Macabre dancing in the street down to the market square, where music and drinking will continue long into the night. I've not gotten much sleep over the past few weeks, and it's been quite the adventure. It has been a nice change from the slow pace of life at the Natal village. The Darkwater folk have been right there in the thick of it, especially when one of their Nsämanf'tsatsa is around to join in the festivities. Whenever one of them joins the fray, the Darkwater people become ever more frantic in their celebration of life. Some of the things I've seen out in public surpasses even the debauchery I've observed out in the quarter, and no one here seems to even bat an eye. After the last 10th day ritual, I asked Ms. Duvernay if she'd be willing to let me observe the private goings-on up at the big house. At first she seemed quite hesitant about it, but her mood changed a great deal after speaking with Enitin Sabatier. 02:21 a.m. I remember thinking that having an opportunity to view an Nel'lka ritual up close would be quite exciting. I was told that Neo-Sarkic rituals are much more vibrant and stylized than the Proto-Sarkic rituals, and I'll admit, I was filled with more than a little trepidation. If my experience with Nel'lkan rituals has taught me anything, I could never be truly prepared. We began with a procession back through the streets of Rue Macabre from Market Square to the Darkwater compound. As we drew nearer to the compound, the mood of the crowd became increasingly somber, so that as we passed under the arch and onto the Darkwater grounds, the lodge members walked in silence, their steps matching the cadence of Karcist Enitin's low chant. I stood in the courtyard with the rest of the Sabatier and Duvernay as the Nsämanf'tsatsa gave his farewells to the rest of the crowd. They had lapsed entirely into Akankasa, and I could only catch a few words here and there that were obviously more Aditite in origin. As I waited, the Volutaar slipped up beside me and began to translate some of what the Nsämanf'tsatsa was saying. She told me that the ancestor that was inhabiting the young man was an ancient matron named Akuba Mansa Enkruama, and she was born and died long before the Darkwater peoples left Ghana. She was extolling her family on the virtues of living a simple life, and to take care of the children. After her speech, she followed Karcist Enitin into the big house, and I followed along with Ms. Duvernay. I wasn't sure what to expect going into that house. I'd not yet had the opportunity, and I guess I was expecting something similar to the communal house that the Nat I'll live in. I was not expecting the tasteful decor that would have been common in any of the old and majestic houses that are everywhere throughout the quarter. Whatever the Sabatier and the Duvernay are, they've been established families in the quarter for a long time, and the wealth exhibited in their house shows it. The Karcist led us downstairs and into a cellar I had no idea could even exist in the near wetlands that seemed ever present in Rue Macabre. The air grew cool and damp, with a musty odor reminiscent of an old mausoleum. The stairway was lit by old Edison lamps, and it continued down far deeper than I expected. Eventually, we paused before an open doorway. Up until this point, the Nsämanf'tsatsa had been chatting amicably with both Mr. Sabatier and Ms. Duvernay. But as we stepped down onto the final landing before that door, she fell quiet, and I could see her host's hands trembling slightly as he waited patiently for whatever was to come next. There are more Darkwater Lodge members than we originally estimated. Far more. When I turned the corner into that room, I turned into the gaping maw of a hell I never knew could exist. The walls of that vast chamber were lined with thrones, and upon each sat a thing so twisted that I struggle to even remember. Corpses, all, but cursed with animation and a kind of half-life. Each was emaciated and skeletal, but the normal processes of death and decay had been halted by the same horrible power that sustained them. The Karcist and his Volutaar ascended to a round dais in the center of the room, upon which stood a small plinth. Cradled in a wooden stand atop the plinth was a black bowl, covered in dark stains and sigils in a language I did not know. Perhaps someone more versed in the language of Aditum would be able to decipher the words upon that fell instrument, but I fear their sanity would be wrested from them by such a translation. The Nsämanf'tsatsa ascended the dais behind the two, and he knelt before them. I stood far back, just inside the doorway, afraid to step too close to the things that slowly writhed on their thrones. I counted nearly 300 such occupied thrones arrayed around the room, with only a few score more beyond that. It was, as I tried to quickly count the thrones, did I realize that what I thought was merely texture to the floor was a network of desiccated umbilical cords stretching from each of the things on their thrones. The twitching mass merged together beneath the raised dais, where I assume they coagulated to form the trunk of the plinth atop it. The three upon the dais began to chant in unison, using a variant of Akan Kasa that was far more familiar to me, after listening to the cursed syllables of true Aditite I'd studied before. I only caught a few words here and there, and it was enough for me to wish I had no understanding of that tongue. They spoke, perhaps, of apotheoses, of ascension, and as they chanted, both the Karcist and the Volutaar began to change. I thought that they had begun to reach towards each other, their hands sliding over each other's exposed flesh. When they began to meld together into a single thing, I had to force myself to stay quiet. For long minutes I watched as they began to dance slowly around the kneeling form of their ancestor, stroking them with more hands than even their melded form should have had. It was as if there were three different beings melded into that abomination, rather than merely the two. The realization hit me like a stone in my stomach, and as they began to pull something wet and wriggling from the torso of their kneeling companion, I turned and fled that place. Nsämanf'tsatsa, the flesh that walked, the Volutaar lied to me. End of Case Study 3, The Darkwater Lodge. An Anthropological Approach to Sarkicism, Dr. Alexander Pasternak, Department of Anthropology. Case Study 4, House Kurinuka. House Kurinuka is a neo-Sarkic cult of Japanese-Canadian origin, centralized in Vancouver, Canada. It is believed that the founders of House Kurinuka immigrated to Canada during the Issei wave of immigration between 1877 and 1928, and that a second ongoing wave of immigration in the late 20th century has revitalized it and significantly swelled its membership. Despite the name, however, membership in House Kurinuka is not restricted to blood relatives, and many individuals of varying ethnicities have joined or married into the cult since its genesis. House Kurinuka is fully integrated into contemporary Canadian culture, counting many prominent businessmen and socialites as members. The current head is presumed to be Samuel K. Hisawa, a technology and business mogul based out of Metro Vancouver. General consensus states that immigration from Japan to Canada began in the late 19th century, with the first recorded immigrant being a sailor named Manzo Nagano, who arrived in 1877. Their populations had risen to 4,738 by 1901 and around 10,000 by 1911, departing from farms or fishing villages in Japan, particularly the southern islands of Kyushu and Honshu. These Issei were often impoverished but literate young people who settled in Vancouver and Victoria, the Fraser Valley, and other areas along the Pacific coast. Common professions among them included those in the farming, fishing, canning, logging, sawmill, and railway industries, as well as the operation of lodging houses, grocery stores, and restaurants. While documented displays of anomalous abilities were not prevalent during this period, several records do reflect periodic conflict between European and Japanese fishermen over an unusual quantity of salmon caught along the Fraser River, even at times when their migratory patterns should not have led them into the area. Even prior to the Second World War, the Canadian government had implemented discriminatory policies against Asian immigrants, including those of Japanese descent. Denied the right to vote until 1948, they were also barred from certain professions. Violent strikes and a 1907 anti-Asian riot in Vancouver demonstrated that this treatment was not only de jure. In 1908, Canada began to restrict Japanese immigration, setting the quota at 400 males a year, and then only 150 in 1928. Concentrated in enclaves such as Vancouver's Powell Street, they developed their own institutions, including schools, hospitals, and temples. It was through these institutions that the few individuals who had kept to the proto-Sarkic tradition, believed to have originated from a single, small cult in rural Japan, may have begun to communicate their beliefs to a growing and increasingly burdened community. These would later become known as the founders of House Kurinuka. Following the 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor, effects on Japanese Canadians were immediate and severe. Under the War Measures Act, over 21,000 were forcibly removed from the West Coast and ordered to move 100 miles inland, causing them to lose their homes, farms, and businesses. Many were held in camps on the interior, and men were often separated from their families. Confiscated property was sold by the custodian of enemy alien property, and only a small amount paid for the allowances of prisoners at the internment camps. These losses seem to have provided the circumstances for House Kurinuka's ascendance. When restrictions were lifted in 1949 and Japanese Canadians were granted full citizenship, they were free to return to the West Coast, but found little to return to. From Issei, who had lost their lives' work to internment, to the younger Nsäi, who had suffered an irreparable interruption to their education, every level of their society had been affected. Those who lived in Vancouver were no exception. Now elderly, the Issei founders of 1877 to 1928 had passed down their anomalous knowledge to their children and those close to them in the community. Increasingly, they used these skills to secure a foothold in wider society, becoming known for their financial success and business acumen. As these Nsäi, I married and intermingled with other Japanese Canadians as well as outsiders. House Kurinuka grew in size and status. The third generation, or Sansei, grew up significantly more immersed in English-speaking culture and continued to pair social discernment with the use of anomalous psychotropics to outmaneuver their business rivals. In 1967, changes to immigration laws allowed for a renewal of Japanese immigration to Canada. Known as the Shin Issei, these immigrants largely originated from Japan's urban middle class. On the West Coast, many were drawn to the house as a means of securing connections and a support network for themselves and their children in a new country. This would bolster their ranks and continue to reinforce the cosmopolitan nature of the house. While there is no evidence indicating the exact beliefs or practices the founders of the house arrived in North America with, it is quite clear, and members concur, that those beliefs underwent significant metamorphosis under the changing cultural landscape of the 20th century. As Canada itself secularized, so too did the house, discarding many features of their previous practice to create the streamlined doctrine present today. Their philosophy is ultimately nihilistic and atheistic, rejecting both the existence of moral principles and the concept of deities as a discrete classification of entities. Power is rather viewed upon a spectrum, with Yaldabaoth and the Archons believed to have greater capacity, but no difference in nature from humans or, indeed, any other organisms. Sarkites consider their carnomantic abilities to be ultimately derived from the Archons and or Yaldabaoth. This relationship is perceived as commensalistic, with neither party of necessity being harmed. Yaldabaoth is frequently likened in metaphor to marine superpredators. One member I spoke with described the distinction between these entities and Sarkicism in practice as being analogous to the distinction between the shark and the parts of the shark. The remoras know. Belief in the existence of Ion, the claviger, or any events in Sarkic mythology prior to the Sarkic diaspora, circa 1100 BC, is considered to be a matter of personal opinion and rarely considered relevant in everyday life. Nonetheless, a common belief is that the cult's lineage traces back to approximately this time period, and that the claviger Sarn was instrumental in its founding. I was presented with two legends as to the nature of this founding. The first claims that the Hisagi family, and therefore a large proportion of current cult membership, are direct blood descendants of the claviger, while the other holds simply that the chain of succession of Karcists ultimately leads back to her induction of 3 among the Jaman population shortly before the Sarkic diaspora. Unusually among Sarkic groups, House Kurinuka has 2 acting Karcists, Karcist Vaśňa and Karcist Tirusho. The former seems to be the primary Karcist and is most involved in cult proceedings. Upon inquiring about the latter, I was told only that he comes and goes. Also, unusually among Sarkic groups, the house does not keep a religious calendar, and community events take place stochastically, generally in response to significant events in the lives of its members, including rites of passage, marriages, and reproduction. Explicitly, House Kurinuka functions according to a strict hierarchy based upon age and prominence within the organization. Children are expected to be obedient to their older relatives, including siblings, cousins, parents, and aunts and uncles, until the deaths of the latter, while individuals of the same age are expected to defer according to rank or to the amount of time spent as a full member of the group. Interfamilial relationships are significantly more complex, and the rules for obedience are based on factors including, but not limited to, time since immigration, time as a regional resident, apparent economic success, recent monetary transactions, and social and political capital both within and outside of the cult. However, this hierarchy falls somewhat in practice. Individuals place a high priority on maintaining the appearance of obedience while fulfilling their personal ambitions, even if this entails subverting the wishes of their superiors. The principle that one is permitted to do whatever one cannot be prevented from doing holds particularly true here. Several members have happily admitted to having manipulated, stolen from, or extorted other members for economic or social gain, apparently secure in the knowledge that I either would not report these deeds or they would be considered trivial. Interview with Andrea Lamare. Interview subject, Andrea Lamare. Interviewer, Dr. Alexander Pasternak. In review, House Kurinuka seems relatively removed from its original religious underpinnings, thoroughly modernized and nearly agnosticized in the process. However, the summary and the lived experience may be quite different, and for that reason I have procured some interviews with mainly the younger cult members in order to better ascertain how Sarkicism integrates into their seemingly secular everyday lives. Dr. Pasternak greeted Andrea Lamare with a polite smile. "Hello, Miss Lamare. I want to begin by thanking you for taking the time to meet with me today." "Oh, no problem at all." Andrea responded enthusiastically, happy to be a study subject. "I wonder if this counts as high school credits." She added with a laugh, I'm afraid that would be up to your instructors. Dr. Pasternak replied. Shall we start with the questions? Sure, Andrea agreed. Dr. Pasternak adjusted his notes before continuing. Were you born into Nel'lka? Andrea gave a small shrug. Well, I mean. She hesitated before adding, I don't exactly remember my own birth, so. She paused thoughtfully before continuing, but my mother says she's been a member since her own birth, so I'd guess that the same goes for me. And would you consider it to be very important, moderately important, or unimportant when it comes to your everyday life? Dr. Pasternak asked. I would say moderate. Andrea answered, I mean, most days are just regular days. I go to school, go out with my friends, but I'm still aware that Mom and Dad and everyone are always watching to make sure that I only behave properly. Dr. Pasternak tilted his head slightly. How do you feel about their monitoring of your activities? It's just how we do things, Andrea said after a moment's consideration. I mean, sure, it can get a little annoying, but if I had any younger siblings, I'd have to do the same for them, and it's for our own good, you know. No success without obedience, or at least knowing how to get away without it. She gave a playful wink. I see. Dr. Pasternak said, making a note. Are any of your friends outside of the house aware that this group exists, or that you are a member? Not really. Andrea responded with a slight frown. We don't talk about it much. Most of them might think it's a little weird, you know, even if it's cultural, to be a practicing member. Like I should be more advanced than that. And of course, they'd all want to get a worm too, and know all these other things that they don't deserve to know or access. Have you experienced any similar pressures to reveal or share your faith with anyone you know? Dr. Pasternak inquired. No, but I want to be proactive about that, you know. Andrea replied, Because, I mean, there's obviously going to be questions about things that happen in my life, which of course everyone in the house knows about, and it would be sort of nice to only interact with other members, but, well. She gave another small shrug before suddenly exclaiming, Oh, but speaking of things that happen in my life, Sandra, my sister, had her Nel'lka only this spring. That's probably the most exciting thing for us this year. Pardon my interruption. Dr. Pasternak interjected, but what is a Nel'lka in this case? Andrea gestured vaguely with her hands. It's... She hesitated before explaining. The ceremony where she gets her aculoth, where she was made a full member. Now she can participate in more of the rituals and stuff. I see, Dr. Pasternak said, nodding. What does this ceremony entail? Wait. Andrea quickly dug into her bag and retrieved her cellular phone. She asked me to video it. She said she didn't want to forget, no matter how old we got. She laughed as she scrolled through her phone. So I can send you that. That'll probably be more helpful than just my description of it. Are you sure your sister would be all right with you sharing this? Dr. Pasternak asked, raising an eyebrow. Oh, sure. Andrea chuckled. And, well, if she didn't want me to disseminate stuff about her, she should have said something before now. The video in question was received by email a few days later. Video log. Nel'lka ceremony of Sandra Lamare. Upon opening the file, it was discovered that Miss Lamare had annotated, if inexpertly, the video to clarify individuals' identities and roles. These annotations are included in this log for completeness. The video begins with a view of a carpeted floor, before rapidly turning upwards to reveal a large foyer crowded with people. Most are wearing semi-formal to formal Western attire, while a few are dressed in tunic-like or robe-like garments. The camera focuses on a group of 3 young women giggling and speaking with each other. Miss Lamare's annotations identify them as Junko, Sandra, and Naomi. Sandra grins and waves at the camera, which then turns to focus on a group of conversing adults, 2 women and a man. They peer down at it with slight smiles, raising their eyebrows. One of the women, annotated as Mom, reaches out towards the camera. "Andrea, honey, put the phone away for a second and come meet Mr. and Mrs. Suzuki," she says. Andrea seems to hesitate, and the view swings towards the floor again. Indistinct pleasantries can be heard. When the camera turns upward once more, it moves out and away towards the other guests. Most appear unfazed by being filmed, ignoring Andrea in favor of existing conversations, though she receives a few polite greetings. Without any apparent signal, all conversation abruptly ceases. At a leisurely pace, the camera follows the crowd as they begin to file out of the foyer and move deeper into the building. After several turns, they arrive at a wide doorway leading to a staircase that descends below. The crowd begins to descend, slowing to navigate the narrower passageway. The staircase opens into a cavernous basement. While unusually large, with proportions resembling an auditorium, its design is modern and minimalist, in keeping with the rest of the house. The only light source appears to be a green glow emanating from beyond the camera's purview. When it swings around, the source is revealed: an unidentified species of bioluminescent fungus, sprouting in clusters where the walls meet the ceiling. Mats of mycelium indicate that the fruiting bodies are anchored into and deriving sustenance from the interior wall space. Rows of seats fill the chamber, facing a pedestal with a curtain draped behind it, stretching from floor to ceiling. While the curtain is of unknown material, the pedestal appears to be made of polished travertine limestone. Once the entire crowd has entered the basement, they stand before their seats, seemingly waiting for something. From a row in front of the rest, the camera pans out to show the other occupants of this row. They include the woman earlier identified as Mom, a man annotated as Dad, several elderly members of the crowd, and a number of those dressed in robes and tunic-like garments. Among them, the older couple from before Mr. and Mrs. Suzuki can be seen. They take their seats. The camera rotates. Behind them, the rest of the attendees follow suit. The camera faces forward once more. The woman previously established to be Sandra and Andrea's mother, later identified as Andrea Lamare, rises from her seat. Turning to address the audience, she welcomes them to their home and thanks them for attending Sandra's Nel'lka ceremony. Sandra herself, who has been out of view for some time, now emerges from behind the curtain. The camera zooms in on her face. Her pupils appear significantly dilated, and her movements show reduced coordination relative to earlier moments in the video. She is dressed in a garment resembling a white yukata, which she then removes. A humanoid figure with a veiled face, identified by Miss Lamare as that's Terusho. He was around more than enters the frame. It halts, facing Sandra Lamare and her sponsors. "What is your name?" the figure asks. "Sandra Erica Lamare." Sandra responds, "And they that present you." The figure continues, "Andrea Lamare and Claude Suzuki." She replies. And so saying, do you consent to bind yourself to this house, from now until whensoever your life may end, to hold no other allegiance and wield no other power? The figure intones, as the remora latches itself to the shark, so I swear this to be true. Sandra declares, and do you vow this of your own will, in the knowledge that you shall yet have the freedom to act as you will? The figure asks once more, as the eel chooses its own hollow, so I do. Sandra affirms. Claude Suzuki turns and exits the frame, returning with the transected upper torso of a woman. Much of the skin is overgrown with cyst and polyp-like structures. The body is placed upon the pedestal, and Andrea Lamare is guided to approach it, standing at a sufficient distance to reach out and touch it. She speaks several words in an unidentified language. She then removes a large fatty organ and one of the anterior ribs from the thorax, ingesting the former. Using one hand and the removed rib, she paints the area between her cheekbones and collarbones with blood from the body, then rises again. The veiled figure produces a white, vermiform organism, identified as an instance of SK biotype 006, from the folds of its robes. Lifting it with both hands, he drops to a kneeling position. Sandra takes it in her own hands, lifts her head until her face is inclined upward, and ingests it. She stands perfectly rigid for several seconds before lowering her head once more. Her posture seems to relax. The veiled figure moves out of the frame. The ritual appears to be concluded. Movement and conversation resume among the crowd. Sandra is given a large bowl of water and a towel with which to wipe off the blood. After doing so, she clothes herself once more and, amidst the sound of congratulations, heads out into the crowd to rejoin her friends. Behind her, rhizomorph-like structures emerge from the stage, growing through and over the abandoned corpse. As they begin to digest it, the fungal bodies lining the walls gradually increase in luminosity. It seems apparent that House Kurinuka endeavors to keep their anomalous activities out of the public eye, despite their professed indifference to intrinsic behavioral standards. No employees of companies owned by Hisawa or other House members have any connection to any of the Lower Mainland's anomalous communities, a statistic that may reveal a vested interest on House Kurinuka's part to maintain their ignorance. Employee blogs and online communications reveal a prevalent psychotropic culture at Hisawa's two largest companies, with psychotropics of choice including alcohol, cannabis sativa, prescription amphetamines and analgesics, and a drug known only by the trade name Kajuran. This drug is reportedly available only through Rutulus Compounding Pharmacy, a small naturopathic pharmacy chain based exclusively in the Lower Mainland. Upon further investigation, Rutulus was discovered to be owned by another high-ranking House member. A sample of Kajuran was procured from Rutulus for spectrometric analysis. Although the majority of the capsule weight was accounted for by binders including mannitol starch and microcrystalline cellulose, and fillers including cornstarch and saccharin sodium, two bioactive ingredients were identified. 14.1% by weight was accounted for by the theoretical but unattested compound dihydroxyisoguline. This compound acts as a competitive agonist to the ADR-01, a dendritic receptor, inducing cerebral vasodilation and metabolic elevation. 3.7% by weight was accounted for by a mixture of muscarine allosteric antagonists. These compounds act as non-selective antagonists for the GABA ionotropic receptor. Trace amounts of protein were also found, mostly in fragmentary form. Preliminary blast P placed the isolated peptides as having high structural similarities to vertebrate galactosylceramidase enzymes, and are presumably involved in vivo in the digestion of cell membranes and/or myelin. Overall, Calixtinus has nootropic effects, which may explain its popularity among local tech employees. With few reported side effects, this drug increases human reaction time and attention, presumably advantageous to individuals in a competitive business environment. The desire for intelligence and capability would drive many, it seems, to seek exogenous sources. The source of both active ingredients is a fungus known colloquially as Calixtinus, Unosera or wine bowl, presumptively named Ascocarine loei, pending full description and publication, which is cultivated on a small scale under the oversight of another House member, Mr. James Toda. This species is essentially saprotrophic and is cultivated outdoors on mulch and sections of softwoods. Aware that commercial fungus farming is nowadays most frequently done indoors with sterilized and standardized substrates, I inquired about Toda's choice of natural cultivation methods. Although the response was highly technical, the general gist was that Aloei has very specific nutrient requirements that cannot be met with commercial substrates, and this method of cultivation allows him to customize their nutrient input. Mr. Toda seemed equally keen to point out that Aloei is uncontrolled under federal or provincial law. No solid answers were provided when I inquired whether Mr. Toda or any of his compatriots were considering expanding their monopoly. However, given Rutulus's popularity, I would not be surprised to see Calixtinus eventually hit a wider market. While walking back to my lodging following an evening meeting with a colleague, I was approached by an unknown individual. The individual's shabby, concealing garments, along with the scarf used to cover the head and neck, stymied any potential identification. The following is a transcript of our interaction. Interview log, unidentified House member. Dr. Alexander Pasternak looked up as a shadow crossed the threshold of the dimly lit room. "Can I help you?" he asked. For a few moments there was only silence. "Perhaps you can, Dr. Pasternak." A figure finally replied. Dr. Pasternak hesitated, his brow furrowing. Do I know you?" "Not in person, not yet. But come, Doctor, you have been asking after me for days now. Surely it cannot come as a surprise that I too may be curious, may wish, perhaps, to meet with you." A realization settled over Dr. Pasternak, his voice steady despite the weight of it. "You are Terusho." "Yes," the figure confirmed. Dr. Pasternak exhaled, his mind racing. "If I may, your followers claim to have seen very little of you recently, and none were able to provide me with, to be honest, any information at all. I was half convinced you were an urban legend, or a trick to gauge my credibility. And if your duty is to guide them spiritually, why make yourself so scarce?" Terusho gave a knowing sigh. "Ah, yes." With deliberate movements, the figure rearranged its clothing until only its eyes were visible. "And now we come to my reason for seeking you out." Dr. Pasternak leaned forward, which is. Again, silence stretched between them, long and uneasy. Finally, Terusho spoke. "The world is rupturing. The song, it has festered now longer than my memory, since before the histories were written. But no abscess remains forever. If not lanced, they tear open of their own accord, and now, The skin of reality thins. Stretches taut. Rhythm and melody, even the words. The figure's voice grew distant, almost hollow. Even with ears closed, they reverberate through the bones. Everything is all warped awry, the apprehension of a shake of the head. There are not even the right words to speak of it, but something terrible is coming, and it sends sickness before it into the tissues of everything that is. Doctor? Pasternak remained silent, watching as Tarusho continued, their voice a blend of resignation and unease. It is, what is your word? Necrosis. The soul concretized has a form that may succumb, may begin to die, when intrusion can no longer be borne. A sharp, mirthless laugh followed. Too late now that we have opened up our passageways to smell and swallow and let it in. An eft that poisons itself with its own toxins. Always bleed it dry before you devour it, even if you are starving otherwise. Like metal that won't go away, won't come out, even though I must. Tarusho's hands clawed at their own neck, sharp nails drawing blood. The movement exposed what Dr. Pasternak had assumed to be a loose garment sleeve, revealing instead an enfolded, highly vascularized mucous membrane, pitted with ulcers. The sight of it sent a shiver through him, too deep by centuries. I cannot. The figure stilled, hunching over, one hand covering their eyes. Their claws, Dr. Pasternak noted, were cracked and damaged, perhaps a sign of deteriorating health. Concern crept into his voice. I do not mean any offense, but are you all right? Tarusho's response was sharp, almost a snarl. Doctor. Then, after a long pause, their voice softened. Forgive me. I shall endeavor to be clearer. I no longer involve myself with our followers because I cannot. Their touch burns, here a little less, there a little more, but the essence is the same, one poison. Would you press furuncle to carbuncle to cure the latter? A bitter chuckle followed. There is too much to be considered, and I too distracted to consider it. I know that Nel'lka as it exists grows untenable. I also know this may not be true. A deep breath. So no. We are none of us well, but I fear I may be irremediable. They called the gods' touch maddening in the old scripture. Dr. Pasternak regarded the figure carefully before speaking. And so you believe that you have been driven insane. Karcist Tarusho looked at Dr. Pasternak, his eyes intense. Look, Doctor, would you profess differently? He asked. Dr. Pasternak shifted slightly, feeling the weight of the question. I am not qualified to make such judgments. Is there nothing that your followers are capable of doing to help you? He asked. Karcist Tarusho let out a dry laugh. In Nel'lka such things are true, because it is painful, and so the truth usually is. And our skill is in Lihakudak, the shepherding of the flesh. The mind must already be strong. No, no help from my people. And the physicians for this city's commons would ask inconvenient questions. Dr. Pasternak nodded thoughtfully. That, I think, would be likely. Karcist Tarusho's expression darkened. But your foundation, the commons do not know the truth of all the lives paraxial to their own because you do not will it. You make them forget. You remember the things that cannot be remembered. He leaned forward, voice steady but sharp. Make no mistake, Doctor. I know my people have given you all and more of the information you have requested of them, because they know it will not harm them any. You cannot break your materialistic play acting on the orders of your superiors, so you can reveal nothing of them to their enemies. They believe you powerless. A pause, then he continued, his tone low but deliberate. But power has no single axis. Tear out a handful of this soil and you hold more lives than your entire race has ever lived. One clod of earth and you are a god. He took a step closer, his voice growing more intense. You may try to be polite, but your people are not subtle, Doctor. They resent anything outside of your carefully crafted ignorance. You would love to wall every one of us away from all those masses you deem normal, because behind your locks or fences or bolt cages there would be no possible means for us to harm them. Because any of us placed there would be controlled, would be safe. Is this not so? Doctor, Pasternak swallowed, choosing his words carefully. There are, definitely, some personnel within the Foundation who feel that way. But, clearly, as you said, you do not think I would be capable of bringing you in, even were I to decide it necessary. Karcist Chirusho closed his eyes for a moment. All creatures desire safety. He murmured, Doctor. Pasternak leaned forward, frustration creeping into his voice. If I may be so blunt, what exactly are you trying to get at here? Karcist Chirusho opened his eyes, his voice now tinged with a quiet desperation. Doctor, terrible as it may be to admit, I am begging your help. You have control over thought. Let me use it for my own as well. Doctor, Pasternak raised an eyebrow. And what of the rest of the house? I presume they would disapprove of such an arrangement. Karcist Chirusho's lips curled into a bitter smile. Oh, surely. It would be the vilest of betrayals. The natural order upturned, worthy of being left to rot, without even the respect of being eaten. He grinned, revealing a row of needle-like teeth and a large mass of spongiform tissue connected to the palate of his mouth. Doctor, Pasternak found himself staring at the strange structure, unsure how it did not inhibit breathing or speech. But let them stop us, then, if they will. I benefit, and it would seem you would too. What they feel is immaterial. Doctor, Pasternak sighed, his voice cautious. I will have to discuss your request with my supervisors before I can give you anything else, I'm afraid. But just to make sure that you understand what you are asking, the Foundation does not release anomalies from containment. Even were you to be completely recovered, we could not ever permit you to return to your current position. Karcist Chirusho's smile faded, his voice becoming more somber. Yet neither do you kill them. No, at present I believe this my wisest choice. And yours too, Doctor, ask them. He paused, his expression almost pleading. Please. I brought the content of this conversation to the department, expressing the Karcist's seeming willingness to enter containment in order to acquire reliable medical care. As I had been, the Foundation was at first suspicious of such an arrangement. However, the opportunity for a stable and seemingly willing source of information on the structure and activities of House Kurinuka was deemed too valuable to abandon. Permission was therefore obtained to reconnect with and bring in the Karcist. However, weeks of investigation turned up no further signs of it, and no further attempts at contact were made from its side. When questioned, all members of the House refused to provide any comment or speculation as to the Karcist's whereabouts. End of Case Study 4, House Kurinuka,